Grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's get started. It was fall of '90, and Michael and I thought we were finally catching a break. We'd scraped together every penny we had, sold off anything that wasn't bolted down, and bought this double-wide mobile home. Land included, 2 acres, just outside of Claremont, Pennsylvania. Rural, really rural, like dirt roads, deer crossing, hear your neighbor's dog barking from a mile away rural. We were both so excited. Fresh start, clean slate, all that stuff people say when they're trying to convince themselves it's going to be different this time. The trailer was, well, it was old, needed work, but it was ours. The land was the best part, trees everywhere. Mostly pines, thick and dark, but mixed in with some oaks and maples that were just starting to turn colors. That first month, just before everything went downhill, it was actually kind of beautiful. You know, the leaves changing, that crisp air smell. Almost felt peaceful. Almost. Anyway, we were settling in, painting walls, fixing leaks, all the fun homeowner stuff you do when your home is basically a giant tin can on wheels. Sleep wasn't coming easy, though. New place, new noises. It was quieter than the city we'd left behind, but a different kind of quiet. A quiet that's loud, if that makes any sense. Every little snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, it sounded huge out there in the dark. This one night, it must have been a full moon because the whole bedroom was washed in this milky light. I was just lying there, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in on me. The air was thick, even with the windows cracked. It was one of those humid fall nights that just cling to you. I swear, you could taste the moisture in the air. I flipped onto my side, trying to get comfortable, but my mind was racing. Worries about money, about work, about if we'd made the right decision. The usual junk. Finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. The stuffy air felt like it was pressing down on me. I got up, walked over to the bedroom window and pushed it open wider, hoping for even the slightest breeze. Nothing. Just still, heavy air and that weirdly bright moonlight. And then I heard it. It wasn't like a normal noise. Not a car, not an animal I recognized, not the wind. It was a heavy thump, like something really big and solid landing hard. On the roof, my heart jumped right into my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body clenched up. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, deliberate, heavy steps on the roof of our mobile home. I held my breath, listening. My ears were ringing, trying to pick out any other sound besides the pounding of my own heart. Thump, thud. That last one was louder, like whatever it was had shifted its weight. It definitely sounded like footsteps. But who? What would be walking on our roof? Slowly, like I was moving through thick water, I crept over to the window again. My hands were sweating so badly I could barely grip the cheap plastic frame. I peeked out, just a sliver of my eye above the windowsill. The moonlight was almost blinding, reflecting off the aluminum siding. And that's when I saw it. Standing there just a few feet from the side of the trailer, in the middle of our yard, bathed in that eerie moonlight. It was huge. I mean, huge. Bigger than anything I'd ever seen standing on 2 legs. It was grayish, almost the same color as the tree bark in the shadows, but lighter, like ash. Naked, completely naked. No fur, no clothes, nothing. Just skin, stretched tight over muscles that looked like they were carved out of stone. And muscles everywhere, not like a bodybuilder, but thicker, denser, brutally strong-looking. It was facing away from me towards the woods, but I could see its back, and it was monstrous. The shoulders were unbelievably wide, hunched forward a little, and the back, I can't even describe it. Lumpy, knotted with muscle, with these weird ridges along the spine. It was just wrong. Everything about it was wrong. And tall. God, it was tall. I'm terrible at judging height, but it looked like it was at least 10 feet tall. Maybe taller. It was towering over everything. Even the small pine tree near the edge of the yard seemed dwarfed next to it. I just stared, frozen, my mind completely blank. It was like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It was like seeing something that shouldn't exist, something ripped out of a nightmare and dropped right there in my backyard. Then it moved. It turned its head slowly, like it heard something or sensed something. And even without seeing its face, I knew it was looking right at my window. I felt it, like a cold finger running down my spine. That's when the real terror hit me, not just fear, but pure animal panic. This wasn't a bear or a deer or some weirdo neighbor. This was something else, something ancient and evil and impossible. It started to walk towards the trailer, slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall was heavy, even on the soft grass. I could feel the vibrations through the floor of the trailer, even through my bed. Thump, thump, thump. Closer and closer, towards my window. My breath hitched in my chest. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, just watched, paralyzed as this thing kept coming. It got closer and closer. I could see the muscles in its legs flexing with each step, the way its back rippled under the moonlight. It was like watching a predator stalk its prey. Finally, when it was maybe 20 feet away, when I could see the outline of its head, even though it was still turned slightly away, my lungs unlocked. A strangled gasp escaped my throat, then another. I stumbled back from the window, tripping over the edge of the rug. I scrambled backwards, fumbling for Michael's side of the bed. He was out cold, dead asleep as usual. "Michael! Michael, wake up!" I was hissing, shaking him as hard as I could, but he was a heavy sleeper. It was like trying to wake a rock. "Michael, please, wake up. There's something outside." My voice was shaking, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't know what else to do. I just knew I couldn't face whatever that thing was out there alone. He finally stirred, groaning and rolling over. "Huh? Liz? What's going on?" He was groggy, confused. "What time is it?" "It doesn't matter what time it is. There's something outside, something huge, by the window. You have to get up." I was practically pulling him out of bed now, my voice rising with desperation. "Get your gun, Michael, please, hurry." Gun. We kept a shotgun in the closet, mostly for feeling safer out there. Michael was never much of a hunter, but he knew how to use it. He was still half asleep, blinking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Gun? What are you talking about? What's outside?" "I don't know. I don't know what it is. Just get the gun, please." I was pleading with him, grabbing his arm, pulling him towards the closet. Finally, he seemed to realize I wasn't joking. He saw the terror in my eyes. He pushed himself up, still shaky, and stumbled over to the closet. He fumbled for the shotgun, his movements slow and clumsy with sleep. "Liz, calm down. What did you see?" He was trying to sound reassuring, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. He didn't believe me, not yet. "Just get the gun. Please hurry." I couldn't explain it, couldn't put words to the sheer horror of what I'd seen. It was beyond words. It was something you had to see to even remotely understand. He finally got the shotgun out of the closet, checked the safety, and held it awkwardly in his hands. Okay. Let's see what's going on. Show me." He still sounded skeptical, like he expected to see a raccoon or something. I didn't want to go back to the window. Every instinct screamed at me to stay as far away from that window as possible. But I knew we couldn't just hide in the bedroom. If that thing was still out there, it could do anything. We had to see what it was doing. "Not the window," I whispered, my voice trembling. "The back door. I think it moved. I heard it walking around." I wasn't sure why I thought that. Just a feeling, a gut feeling that it wasn't just standing there anymore. Michael nodded slowly, his face finally starting to lose some of the sleepiness and gain a little bit of concern. He gestured for me to go first. I shook my head. No way. He was the one with the gun. He sighed, a little louder this time. All right. He took a step forward, then another. Slowly, We crept out of the bedroom and down the narrow hallway towards the back door. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought it was going to explode. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot in the silence. We reached the back door. It was one of those cheap, flimsy aluminum doors with a small window in it. I didn't want to look through the window. I was terrified of what I might see. Michael reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking slightly. "Ready?" he whispered. I just nodded, unable to speak. I was so scared I felt like I might throw up. He took a deep breath and slowly, deliberately, turned the doorknob. He pulled the door open, just a crack at first, then wider, and then I saw it again. It was standing right there, just outside the back steps in the driveway, even closer than it had been to the window, maybe only 15 feet away. It was facing us now, its back to the woods. The moonlight was full on its face. I screamed, a real scream this time, not just a gasp, a raw, terrified shriek that ripped through the night air. It was involuntary, uncontrollable, the sound of pure, unadulterated horror. The thing reacted instantly. It snapped its head around, and for the first time I saw its face. And God, its face. It wasn't human, not even close. It was bestial, savage, like something you'd see carved on an ancient totem pole, something monstrous and demonic. The eyes were black, huge and empty, reflecting the moonlight like polished stones. The nose was flat, almost piggish, with wide nostrils that flared as it turned. And the mouth was the worst, too wide, stretched too far across its face, filled with rows and rows of sharp, pointed teeth, like a shark's mouth, but somehow even more brutal. It stared at us for maybe a second, maybe less, just long enough for that image to burn itself into my brain, forever. Then, with a speed that was shocking for something that big, it moved. It didn't run. It didn't even seem to use its legs like a normal creature. It was more like it propelled itself. It was there, facing us, then it was gone. One moment it was standing in the driveway, the next it was a blur of grey, moving so fast it was almost invisible. It vanished into the darkness of the pine woods surrounding our property like it had just been sucked into the shadows. There was a crash of branches breaking, the snap of twigs underfoot, then silence. Just like that. Gone. Michael, still holding the shotgun, stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the empty driveway. He hadn't seen it. He'd opened the door just a split second too late. He'd heard me scream and seen nothing. "Liz, what was it? What did you see?" His voice was still shaky, but now it was mixed with confusion and disbelief. I couldn't speak. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the woods where it had disappeared. It went that way. It was huge, Michael. Monstrous. You wouldn't believe it. He lowered the shotgun slightly, looking from me to the woods, then back to me again. A bear? Was it a bear? Maybe a really big bear? He was grasping at straws, trying to find some logical explanation for my terror. "No!" I finally managed to choke out, my voice still a whisper. Not a bear, not anything like a bear. It was like a monster, like something from a horror movie. It had a face, Michael, a face you wouldn't believe. I shuddered, the image of that bestial face flashing behind my eyes again. It was naked, grey, and huge, and it walked on 2 legs. Michael looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. I could see the doubt there, the skepticism. He thought I'd imagined it, that I'd panicked, seen something in the shadows, and let my imagination run wild. "Liz," he said gently, taking a step closer, "maybe you were dreaming. You haven't been sleeping well. Maybe you just had a nightmare and woke up scared." "No," I insisted, shaking my head fiercely. "I wasn't dreaming. I saw it, Michael. I really saw it. It was right there, in the yard, on the roof." My voice was rising again, edged with hysteria. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, let's go take a look. Maybe there are tracks or something. We'll go outside, but stay behind me, okay? He lifted the shotgun again, checking the safety one more time. We went outside. The moonlight was still bright, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. The air was still and silent, except for the chirping of crickets. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Michael swept the flashlight beam across the grass, searching for tracks, for any sign that something huge and heavy had been there. We walked around the yard, around the trailer, shining the light into the edge of the woods. Nothing. No broken branches, no trampled grass, no footprints in the soft earth, nothing at all. It was like it had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. He turned back to me, his face grim. "See, Liz, there's nothing here. It must have been your imagination. You were probably just half asleep, scared. It's okay, it happens." He tried to put his arm around me, to comfort me, but I pulled away. "No," I said again, my voice low and steady this time. "I know what I saw, Michael. I know it wasn't my imagination. It was real. I could still see it, feel the fear gripping my heart. It was too vivid, too real to have been a dream." We went back inside, the silence of the trailer feeling heavy and oppressive now. Michael still didn't believe me. He made me some tea, told me to try to relax, that it was just stress and a bad dream. He went back to bed, and eventually, after tossing and turning for hours, I drifted off into a fitful, uneasy sleep, haunted by the image of that monstrous face. The next morning, the sun was shining, birds were singing, everything looked bright and normal, like the night before had been a bad dream. Except it hadn't. I got up, feeling stiff and drained. Michael was already up making coffee. He looked tired too, but he was trying to act normal, cheerful. "Morning," he said, forcing a smile. "See? Nothing to worry about. Just a bad night." I didn't say anything. I just poured myself a cup of coffee and walked over to the kitchen window. I looked out at the yard, at the trees, expecting to see nothing. Just the same peaceful, ordinary landscape. And then I saw it. On the roof of the trailer, right near the kitchen window, almost directly above where I'd been standing the night before, was a dent. Not a small dent, not a dent that could have been there before. A huge, deep, unmistakable dent in the aluminum roof, like something incredibly heavy had stepped right there and crushed the metal. It was big, maybe 3 feet across, and sunk in deep. You could see the outline of a large, heavy foot, or something like a foot. I gasped, pointing at it. "Michael, look!" He turned around, following my gaze. His eyes widened when he saw it. He stared at the dent for a long moment, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. "What the hell?" he whispered finally. He went outside to get a better look. He climbed up on a stepladder we kept by the shed and examined the dent closely. He touched it, ran his hand over the crushed metal, his expression changing from disbelief to something else, something I couldn't quite read. He climbed back down, his face pale. "Okay," he said slowly, avoiding my eyes. "Okay, maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe something did get on the roof." He still sounded uncertain, reluctant to admit he'd been wrong. "What do you think it was?" I asked, my voice trembling again. "You said maybe a bear. Could a bear do that?" He shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice quiet now. "No, not a bear. A bear wouldn't make a dent like that. And on the roof. Bears don't climb on roofs." He paused, still looking at the dent, his brow furrowed in thought. Then he said, in a low, almost mumbled voice, Maybe it was a deer. A really big buck, somehow got up there and panicked. Deer. A deer. Trying to explain away a dent the size of a small car tire with a deer. I just stared at him, speechless. He knew it wasn't a deer. He had to know. But he was still trying to find some logical, normal explanation, anything to avoid admitting that something impossible might have happened. I didn't argue with him. What was the point? He wasn't going to believe me. Not really. He would always try to explain it away, find some rational reason for the dent, for my fear. But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't a deer, and it wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something ancient, something terrifying, something that should not exist. And to this day, almost 30 years later, I still can't explain it. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat, seeing that face in my mind, feeling that same icy terror gripping my heart. We moved out of that trailer a few months later, couldn't stay there. The feeling of being watched, of being unsafe, never went away. We never talked about it much after that. Michael never mentioned it again, and I learned to keep it to myself. Who would believe me anyway? But I know what I saw. I know what was on our roof that night in the woods outside of Claremont. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the shadows are long, I still wonder if it's still out there, still watching, still waiting. And that, honestly, is the part that chills me to the bone, even now. Story 2. It was a Tuesday. I remember that much because Tuesdays were always my day to really dig into the house stuff. Mark, my husband, was at work in town, and it was just me and Duke and Misty. Duke's our Rottweiler, a big softy really, unless he thought something was up. Then he was all business. Misty's my mare, a real sweetheart, out in her stall in the barn, just enjoying the late fall weather we were having that year. It was 90, maybe late October, just before deer season really kicked off. You'd hear the occasional gunshot in the distance, guys sighting their rifles, getting ready, but mostly it was quiet, that deep woods quiet that settles over everything out here. Peaceful. I was inside, dusting mostly, you know, the usual, just puttering around the house. I had the radio on low, some country station humming in the background. Then all of a sudden the quiet shattered. It was Misty, her scream. Not just a neigh, but a full-on scream of pain and terror. It was gut-wrenching. I've never heard a horse sound like that, not even when she'd gotten tangled in barbed wire once. This was different. It was like pure, raw fear. I dropped the dust rag, my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could even really process what was happening, I heard the barn doors banging, like she was kicking the stall walls with everything she had. Boom, 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 echoing across the yard. And then Duke went ballistic. He'd been dozing by the front window, like he always did in the afternoons, just soaking up the little bit of sun. But when Misty screamed, he went from 0 to 100 in a split second. Hair on his back stood straight up, teeth bared, growling, a deep rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards. He was lunging at the front door, scratching at the wood, barking his head off. It wasn't just his normal "someone's at the door" bark. This was primal, frantic, like something was attacking us. He was snarling and snapping, completely losing it. I was still trying to figure out what the hell was going on, fear knotting up in my stomach. Before I could even move, Duke just exploded through the screen door, tore right through it like it was paper. Glass shards tinkled on the porch, and the ripped screen flapped in the doorway. He was out of control, a black streak of fur and fury heading towards the yard, still barking like a madman. That's when the smell hit me. Oh God, the smell. It's hard to even describe it without feeling sick all over again just thinking about it. Imagine the worst garbage you've ever smelled, like stuff that's been rotting in the sun for weeks, but mix that with something animalistic, like a dead deer carcass that's been lying in the woods for too long, all bloated and festering. And underneath that, this heavy, musky stench like a wild animal but magnified, amplified to this overwhelming, nauseating level. It punched me right in the face, a physical wave of stink that made me gag. My eyes started watering instantly, and my throat tightened up. I stumbled back a step, reeling from it. It was thick, cloying, like you could taste it in the air, this putrid, rotten reek that invaded every corner of the house, even with the doors and windows shut. It wasn't just outside, it was everywhere. I had to see what was causing it, what was happening. Despite feeling like I was about to throw up, I forced myself to move forward, towards the damaged front door. I had to know what was terrifying Misty and Duke so badly, what was making this horrible smell. Holding my breath as much as I could, I crept closer to the doorway. The smell was even worse there, right by the ripped screen. I peered through the opening, squinting through watery eyes. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the yard, the driveway, the fields stretching out towards the woods. The afternoon light was still pretty good, not yet dusk, but the shadows were starting to get longer. Everything looked normal at first glance, too normal. Misty was still screaming in the barn, the sound raw and terrifying. Duke's barking was fainter now, further out in the yard, more frantic yelps than deep roars. The awful smell hung in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket. Then I looked again, further out, towards the edge of our property, where the field met the tree line. There's a neighbor's ATV trail that runs along the edge of our woods, just inside the tree line. That's where I saw it. At first, it just looked like a dark shape, something big and black against the trees. But then it moved, and I realized what I was looking at. It was a figure, standing upright, tall, incredibly tall. It was maybe 20, 30 yards away, just at the edge of the woods. It was monstrous, massive. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was standing, completely still at first, but I could see its shape clearly even in the dappled light filtering through the trees. It was dark, blacker than black, covered in what looked like thick matted fur. And it was huge. I mean seriously huge. Taller than anything I've ever seen standing on two legs, easily 8 feet, maybe more. It was bulky too, not skinny or gaunt, but thick, like it was made of solid muscle and bone. Its arms, they were unnaturally long. They hung down past its waist, almost to its knees. I could see them swaying slightly, even though the rest of it was still. And its shoulders were broad, hunched, giving it this gorilla-like shape, but so much bigger, so much more imposing. My breath caught in my throat. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. A cold, icy fear just gripped me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I felt like I was frozen solid, unable to move, unable to scream, just staring in horrified fascination. It wasn't just the size or the shape, it was something else. Something about the way it stood there, something about the darkness of its fur, something in the sheer wrongness of it. It felt ancient, predatory, like it belonged to a different time, a different world. I recognized it. That's the worst part, I think. I recognized it instantly, even in the daylight, even seeing it clearly for the first time. It was the thing I'd seen the night before, just a glimpse in the dark, by the barn, something moving at the edge of the light from the porch. I'd brushed it off then, told myself it was a shadow, my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. Maybe a deer moving in an unusual way. Mark had just laughed when I mentioned it in the morning, said I was letting the deer hunting talk get to me. He'd said I was probably seeing things, but this wasn't my imagination. This was real, solid, right there, in broad daylight. As I stood there, frozen in terror, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it took a step forward, then another, and another. Just a few steps, maybe 5 or 6 steps in total. But each step was heavy, deliberate, like it was measuring the ground, testing it. It was moving deeper into the woods, away from the field, away from the edge of the tree line, into the thick, dense undergrowth. With each step, it seemed to shrink, to become less distinct, to melt back into the shadows of the trees. And then, just like that, it was gone. Vanished. One moment it was there, this massive, terrifying creature standing right at the edge of my world. And the next, nothing. Just trees and shadows, and the lingering smell of rot and musk. The silence that followed was deafening. The smell was still there, thick and cloying, but the visual presence, the monstrous shape, was just gone. It was like it had never been there at all, except for the lingering terror in my heart and the putrid stench in the air. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared, my legs trembling, my whole body shaking. I couldn't breathe properly, my lungs felt tight and constricted. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, what I'd just experienced. But there was no sense to be made of it. It was impossible, unreal, except it had been real. I'd seen it, as clear as day. Slowly, my legs started to work again. I stumbled back from the doorway, away from the smell, away from the ripped screen. I needed to get to Misty, to make sure she was okay. And I needed to get Duke back inside before he got himself into more trouble. I ran towards the barn, my legs feeling like lead. As I got closer, I could still hear Misty whinnying, but the frantic screams had subsided into agitated snorts and stomps. I threw open the barn door and rushed to her stall. She was a mess, sweating and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She had cuts on her flanks from kicking the stall walls, and her breathing was still ragged and fast. I went into her stall, speaking softly to her, trying to calm her down. She nuzzled my shoulder, her body still trembling under my hand. I checked her over quickly, making sure there were no serious injuries, just the scrapes and bruises from her panic. Duke was back in the yard, pacing back and forth along the edge of the woods, still growling and barking intermittently, but not with the same frenzy as before. He was wary, alert, but the immediate threat seemed to have passed, at least for now. He was watching the trees, ears pricked, hackles still slightly raised. It took me a while to coax Duke back into the house. He was hesitant, nervous, sniffing the air constantly, even inside. He kept glancing back towards the woods, restless and uneasy. Misty calmed down a bit once I was in the barn with her, but she was still jumpy and on edge for the rest of the day. The smell lingered for hours, slowly dissipating, but never completely gone. It clung to the air, to the house, to everything. I opened all the windows, even though it was getting cooler, trying to air the place out, but it didn't really help much. It was like the smell had seeped into the walls, into my clothes, into my skin. Mark got home late that night, tired and hungry. He immediately noticed something was wrong. The house felt different, heavy, charged with something unseen, and he smelled it even faintly, the last vestiges of that horrible stench. He asked what happened, and I told him everything. From Misty's initial scream to seeing the creature at the edge of the woods. He listened quietly, not interrupting, not laughing, not saying I was imagining things. I could see the change in him. The skepticism that had been there that morning when I told him about seeing something the night before was gone, replaced by a quiet, unsettling apprehension. He saw the ripped screen door. He saw Misty's cuts in the barn. He smelled the lingering trace of that awful odor. He knew something had happened, something real, something terrifying. We didn't talk much more about it that night. We just went through the motions, ate a quiet dinner, and went to bed. But neither of us slept well. Every little noise outside, every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves in the wind made me jump. I kept imagining it out there, in the darkness, watching us, waiting, and I still think about it, all the time. That image of it standing there at the edge of the woods, massive and dark and utterly alien. The smell, the fear, the absolute conviction that I was looking at something real, something dangerous, something I couldn't explain. I still can't explain it. To this day, I don't know what it was, what it wanted, or why it was here. All I know is that it was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in my life, and the memory of it. The feeling of that icy fear. It's something that will never truly leave me, and I know deep down that it was out there before, and it could be out there again. And that's a thought that still sends shivers down my spine every time I'm alone in the house, especially as the days get shorter and the nights get longer. I keep Duke close by these days, just in case. Story 3. Okay, so last year it was fall, and I remember it was one of those late October days, kinda crisp. Leaves were mostly brown and yellow and falling. You know, the whole autumn vibe. I was on Marionville Road, heading to Clarion Hospital to pick up Mike. My husband, Michael. He'd just had surgery for a hernia, poor guy, and was ready to come home. This was, I don't know, early afternoon maybe? The light was already starting to get that softer, golden quality you get in the fall afternoons. Marionville Road is this windy backwoods thing, beautiful in the daytime, but at night, especially in the woods, it's creepy as hell. And during the day too, to be honest, because of those logging trucks and gas trucks that tear down it. Always got to be careful. That's why I was going maybe like 40 km/h, even though the limit's probably higher, just taking my time around these bends, especially near Buzzard Swamp. Buzzard Swamp sounds exactly like what it is. Swampy, buggy, and just feels off, even on a sunny day. I was coming up to this tight curve like a real hairpin almost. Just easing into it, hands at 10 and 2 like my dad taught me, keeping an eye out for anything coming the other way, because you never know on that road. And that's when it happened. This wasn't something in the road like a deer jumping out or some dumb squirrel. This was different. It was in my peripheral vision to my right, on the top of this little ridge that runs alongside the road there. Just a flicker, like something moved, caught my eye. My first thought was maybe a deer, they're all over around here, but something felt wrong immediately. It wasn't deer-shaped for one thing, and it moved wrong. I glanced over quickly, just a quick flick of my eyes to the right. And that's when I saw it again, just for a split second, on the ridge, at the tree line, standing there. It was big, really big, taller than any person, taller than any deer, like way taller, and dark. Covered in something dark. Furry? Hairy? I don't know the right word. Just dark and dense looking. Mike was in the passenger seat, reading some stupid book or other, totally oblivious. I was about to say something. Mike, did you see that? But before I could even get the words out, it was gone. Vanished. Poof. Just wasn't there anymore. Like it dropped down behind the ridge or stepped back into the trees. Gone. I kept driving, heart pounding. Not just pounding, but like slamming against my ribs, like it was trying to get out. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, that high-pitched ringing you get when you're really scared. My hands were suddenly sweaty on the steering wheel, and I had to consciously loosen my grip because I was probably squeezing it too hard. Frustration, that's what I felt first, mixed with the terror, yeah, but mostly frustration. Because this wasn't the first time, not even close. I've seen things out in these woods before, always glimpses, always quick, never enough for anyone else to believe me. And every single time when I've tried to tell people, they just look at me like I've got two heads. Elizabeth, honey, it was probably a bear, or maybe a deer in bad light. Or, and this is my favorite, dripping with that patronizing tone, are you sure you're getting enough sleep, Elizabeth? Like I'm making it all up, like I'm crazy. And it's not like I want to see this stuff. It's terrifying. It messes with your head. But I know what I saw. I'm not stupid, and I'm definitely not imagining it. And this time it was so clear, even if it was brief. So close to the road. If it had been any other day, if I wasn't on my way to pick up Mike from the hospital, if I hadn't been worried about him, about getting him home safe, I swear I would have slammed on the brakes right then and there. I would have stopped that car right in the middle of Marionville Road, put it in park, and gotten out. Walked right over to that ridge. I was so angry, so furious at being dismissed all these years, at being made to feel like I was losing my mind. I wanted proof, badly. I wanted to finally have something concrete to show people, to shove in their faces and say, see, I told you so, I'm not crazy. I even had this crazy thought, just for a second, of running into the woods after it, just scrambling up that ridge and into the trees to find... What? Footprints? Broken branches? A tuft of fur? Anything. Something real, something tangible that wasn't just my word against everyone else's skepticism. But then, Mike. Mike just had surgery. He was waiting for me at the hospital. He needed me to bring him home, and even if he wasn't recovering from surgery, the idea of just abandoning him in the car on the side of Marionville Road while I went tromping into the woods after whatever that was, it was insane, irresponsible. I couldn't do it. As much as I wanted to, as badly as I ached to prove myself, I just couldn't. Duty won out. Responsibility. Common sense, maybe. Reluctantly. I kept driving. My hands were still shaking, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my throat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, again and again, as if expecting to see... What? It chasing after the car, standing there on the road? I don't know. I just kept looking, scanning the tree line, expecting... something. Mike, bless his heart, was still reading, completely oblivious. Probably for the best. If I'd started ranting about what I thought I saw, he would have just given me that same concerned, slightly pitying look everyone else does. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to argue. Not then. Not right after seeing that. So I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't say a word. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and focused on the road. Tried to breathe, slow my heart rate down. It was hard. Really hard. Because it wasn't just the initial shock, it was the feeling, that lingering sense of dread, that feeling of being watched even though I couldn't see anything anymore, that primal fear deep down in your gut that tells you something isn't right, something is very, very wrong. The rest of the drive to the hospital was a blur. I don't even really remember it. Just going through the motions, my mind replaying that split second over and over again, trying to make sense of it, trying to rationalize it away like everyone always tells me to. It was just shadows. Your eyes were playing tricks. You're stressed. All the usual dismissals, but none of them fit. Not this time. When I got to the hospital, picked up Mike, got him settled in the car. He was still pretty groggy and out of it, thank God, didn't ask too many questions. The drive back was even worse. It was later in the afternoon now, the shadows were getting longer, and the woods felt darker, deeper. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I was on edge the whole time, my senses screaming. I drove back down Marionville Road, the same way I'd come. Slower this time, maybe even too slow, but I couldn't bring myself to go any faster. Every time we passed a stretch of woods, especially near Buzzard Swamp, my eyes would dart to the trees, searching, expecting, afraid of what I might see, and at the same time almost wanting to see it again. The part that really gets to me? It's not just the fear, it's the doubt, the constant gnawing doubt that creeps in, even after seeing it with my own eyes, because nobody believes me, because I have no proof, because it's always just gone. Before I can get a picture, before I can get a second look, before I can do anything but blink and wonder if I actually saw what I thought I saw. And that's it. That's what happened. I drove to pick up Mike. I saw something on Marionville Road, and I came home. And now I'm just stuck with it. This image in my head, this feeling in my gut, this knowing that there's something out there, something big, something dark, something watching. And nobody, absolutely nobody, believes me. And I don't know what to do about it anymore. Except keep looking, I guess. Keep watching the woods, hoping and maybe also dreading to see it again. Story 4. It was July 2011. I remember because it was right after my birthday, and I was still enjoying the last bit of summer break before heading back to community college in the fall. I was living in Willow Creek back then, in my folks' old place out past the main part of town. Rural, you'd call it. Lots of woods, not many houses close by, perfect for peace and quiet usually. That night started out completely normal. Nothing felt off, nothing seemed weird. It was a Tuesday, I think, and my parents were out of town visiting my sister in the city. I had the whole house to myself, just me and the dogs. I had 3 dogs back then: Buster, a big goofy Labrador; Maggie, a mutt we'd rescued who was mostly terrier and energy; and then little Pepper, this tiny, yappy chihuahua who thought she was a Doberman. Normally, they were all over the place, sniffing into everything, getting underfoot. But that night, they were different. I was in the living room watching some stupid show on TV, probably some rerun or something, and I decided to grab a soda from the kitchen. The kitchen was right off the living room, just through a little archway. As soon as I stepped towards it, I noticed something was up. Buster, Maggie, and Pepper were all standing in the hallway, right outside the archway, just staring at the kitchen. Now, this wasn't normal. Usually, if I was headed towards the kitchen, they were right there with me, hoping for scraps or just wanting to be wherever I was. I stopped and looked at them. "What's wrong with you guys?" I asked, kind of chuckling. They just stayed put. Their tails weren't wagging, and they were all looking in the same direction, into the kitchen. Maggie, who was usually the most playful, was actually kind of crouched down a little, like she was nervous. Pepper was whining softly, a low, pathetic little sound. Buster, being a lab, was trying to act tough, but I could see the hairs on the back of his neck were raised, just a little bit. I went into the kitchen, slowly. I was thinking maybe there was a mouse or something in there that was freaking them out. Sometimes we'd get mice in the fall, but not usually in July. I flipped on the kitchen light. Nothing. Everything looked normal. Dishes were done, counters were clean, fridge was closed. I opened the pantry door and peeked inside. Nothing there either, just cans of soup and cereal boxes. I went over to the back door that led to the yard and the woods. Moonlight was streaming in through the windows above the sink. It was a really clear night, almost unnaturally bright moonlight. I could see the backyard pretty clearly, and beyond that the edge of the woods. Nothing moving, nothing out of place, just trees and shadows, like always. I went back to the dogs. They were still in the hallway, still staring at the kitchen, but now they were pressed even closer together, like they were drawing comfort from each other. I went back into the kitchen, walked around, opened the fridge, closed it, banged a pot on the stove, just trying to figure out what was setting them off. Still nothing. The dogs stayed put in the hallway, refusing to come into the kitchen. It was the weirdest thing. I shrugged it off, figuring they were just being dogs. Maybe they smelled something I couldn't, some animal outside or something. I got my soda, went back to the living room and tried to get back into my show. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The dogs stayed huddled near my feet, unusually quiet, not even begging for a bite of my chips like they normally would. Then the first sound came. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was a thump from outside. Just one, like someone had dropped something heavy on the ground. I paused the TV, listening. Silence, then a second thump, and then a third. Thump, thump, thump. 3 thumps, spaced a couple seconds apart. Then nothing again. Fireworks? I thought, but it was July, not really fireworks season around here. And these didn't sound like fireworks. Fireworks were crackly and bright and flashy. These were just dull, heavy thumps. The dogs reacted immediately. They jumped, startled, and then started whining again, louder this time. Maggie started pacing back and forth in front of the couch. Buster was panting, his eyes wide. Even Pepper, who was normally fearless in her own tiny way, was shaking. I got up and went to the window in the living room, the one that looked out over the front yard and the driveway. Nothing there. Street was empty, no cars, no people. The house next door was dark, their lights were off. Everything was quiet except for the crickets chirping. Then the sounds came again. This time, louder. Thump, thump, thump. Definitely louder. And closer, maybe? It was harder to tell. Still 3 distinct thumps, still that dull, heavy sound. It didn't sound like explosions, not like fireworks. It sounded percussive, like something hitting something else. The dogs went completely nuts. They started barking, not their normal playful barks, but sharp, frantic barks, like they were really scared. They were running around the living room, bumping into furniture, tripping over each other. It was chaos. I tried to calm them down, kneeling down and talking to them, petting them, but it didn't work. They were too worked up, and honestly, I was starting to get freaked out myself. Those sounds, they were unsettling. A third set of thumps came, even louder now. Thump, thump, thump. It was definitely closer, no doubt about it. And the sound, it was like something hitting wood, hard wood, like someone was hitting a tree with something. My heart started to pound. I looked around the living room, feeling this cold dread creeping up my spine. What was that sound? What was happening outside? I went back to the window, peering out into the darkness. Still nothing. Just the streetlights, the shadows of the trees. I decided to call my neighbor, old Mr. Henderson. He lived across the street and a couple of houses down, the closest house to ours. He sometimes set off fireworks around the 4th of July, even a week or two later. Maybe he was just late to the party this year. I grabbed the landline. Yeah, it was 2011, I still had a landline, and dialed his number. His wife, Mrs. Henderson, answered. "Hello, Henderson residence?" "Hi, Mrs. Henderson. It's Ethan Carter from across the street. Sorry to bother you so late, but, is Mr. Henderson setting off any fireworks tonight?" There was a pause. "Fireworks? No, dear. Arthur's not home. He went to visit our daughter in the city this afternoon. He won't be back until tomorrow evening. Is everything all right, Ethan?" Her voice sounded a little worried. Yeah. Everything's fine. Just thought I heard something like fireworks. Must have been mistaken. Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Henderson. Have a good night." "You too, dear," she said, and hung up. My hand was shaking as I put the phone down. Mr. Henderson wasn't home. So it wasn't fireworks. And the sounds, they were getting louder, closer. They were definitely outside, somewhere close to my house. I went to the kitchen again. The dogs followed me this time, but they stayed right at my heels, still tense, still whining. I looked out the kitchen window. This window faced the backyard, and beyond the yard, the woods. And then I heard it again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just 3 thumps anymore. It was rapid, bang, 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 like someone was just wailing on something over and over, and it was close, really close, like right outside. I peered out into the backyard. Moonlight was still bright, casting long, dark shadows from the trees, and that's when I saw it, or at least I thought I saw it, something moving in the shadows, near the big old oak tree at the edge of the yard. The oak tree that was maybe 20 feet from the back of the house. Bang, 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 bang. The sounds were coming from that direction, from the oak tree. It sounded like someone was hitting the tree with something. A big piece of wood, maybe. Like an axe, but not the sharp chop of an axe cutting wood. More like the blunt force of the handle hitting the tree trunk. I strained my eyes, trying to see what was in the shadows. The moonlight was tricky, making everything look distorted. I could see the oak tree, the thick trunk, the branches reaching up towards the sky, and I thought I saw something darker than the shadows, moving behind the trunk, a shape, indistinct, but definitely there. The dogs were going ballistic now. They were jumping and scratching at the back door, whimpering and barking hysterically. They definitely knew something was out there. I picked up Pepper, just scooped her up in my arms. She was trembling like a leaf, her little heart hammering against my chest. Maggie and Buster were circling around me, barking and growling, facing the back door, facing the woods. My fear went from unease to full-blown terror. Something was out there, in my backyard, right next to the house. Something was banging on the oak tree, over and over again, and my dogs were absolutely terrified. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? What would I even say? Hello? Someone's banging on a tree in my backyard. They'd think I was crazy. Should I go outside and see what it was? Absolutely not. No way in hell. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. Bang, 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 bang. The sounds continued, relentless, brutal. It felt like it was getting louder, like whatever was doing it was getting more and more frantic, or maybe it was just my own panic making it seem worse. The dogs were climbing all over me now. Maggie had jumped onto the couch and was trying to burrow under my arm. Buster, despite being a big dog, was actually trying to climb onto my lap, whimpering and pushing his head into my chest. Pepper was still shaking in my arms, making these tiny, choked whimpers. All three of them, usually so different in their personalities, were united in their terror, and their terror was feeding into mine. I was huddled on the couch in the dark, just listening to those sickening, repetitive bangs coming from outside. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could feel the sweat running down my back, even though the house wasn't hot. My hands were clammy, my legs were trembling. I was completely and utterly terrified. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare, some horror movie, except this was real. This was actually happening to me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, just as the fear was reaching a peak I didn't know I could handle, something else happened. Headlights, bright headlights, flooded the living room, shining through the windows. A car was pulling into the driveway. I could hear the crunch of gravel under the tires, the engine rumbling, and then music, loud music coming from the car radio, blasting through the quiet night. The banging stopped, just like that, instantly. 1 second, bang, 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 and then silence. Complete and utter silence except for the sound of the car engine and the loud music. I stared at the window, blinking in the sudden light. The headlights swept across the backyard, across the oak tree. I could see the tree clearly now, illuminated in the harsh glare. Nothing there, just the tree, branches swaying slightly in the breeze. No shadows moving, no strange shapes, nothing at all. The car door slammed shut. I heard voices talking, laughing. My uncles. It was my uncles, Uncle Joe and Uncle Frank. They were yelling to each other over the music, their voices loud and cheerful. They came to the front door, knocked loudly, and then just opened it and walked in. "Ethan! Hey, kiddo, surprise!" Uncle Joe shouted, grinning. Uncle Frank was right behind him, also grinning, carrying a 6-pack of soda and a bag of chips. They hadn't called, hadn't said they were coming. They just showed up out of the blue. They were on their way back from some weekend fishing trip, they said, and decided to stop by and see me since they were passing through Willow Creek. They were loud, boisterous, completely oblivious to the terror I had just gone through. They didn't notice the dogs were still clinging to me, didn't notice how pale I was, didn't notice anything was wrong. They were just happy, joking around, asking me how I was doing, telling me about their fishing trip. I managed to stammer out a greeting, my voice still shaky. I tried to act normal, tried to smile, but I could barely think straight. My heart was still racing, my hands were still trembling. The dogs were slowly calming down, sensing the change in atmosphere, the new human presences, but they were still on edge, still jumpy. We sat in the living room for a while, talking, drinking soda, eating chips. They were telling jokes, laughing loudly. Slowly, gradually, I started to relax a little. The sound of their voices, their normal human presence, pushed back the fear, at least for a while. But I never forgot those sounds, those 3 thump sets at first, and then that frantic, relentless banging. I never figured out what it was, what was out there in my backyard that night. My uncles didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. They just thought I was being my usual quiet, slightly weird self. After they left, a couple of hours later, I checked the backyard. I went out with Buster and Maggie. Pepper refused to go near the back door. I walked around the oak tree, shone a flashlight up and down the trunk. Nothing. No marks, no scratches, no signs of anything hitting it. Just the old oak tree, standing there silently in the moonlight. I never heard those sounds again after that night. And I never saw anything unusual around the house before or since. But sometimes, especially on clear moonlit nights, I look out at the woods behind my house and I remember those sounds, those heavy, relentless bangs. And I wonder, what was it? What was out there in the shadows banging on that tree? And why did it stop so suddenly when my uncles arrived? It's been years and I still have no idea. And that's probably the scariest part of it all, the not knowing. The feeling that something truly strange and unsettling happened, something I can't explain, something that just stopped. And I'm still here, wondering. Story 5. Okay, so this happened back in '97. Seems like a lifetime ago now, but sometimes it feels like yesterday, especially when I'm driving down certain roads around Benton County. I was delivering papers for the Advertiser back then, you know, the weekly local thing. It was summer, beautiful day, one of those Ohio days where the sun is bright but not baking hot. Just nice. Perfect for driving around with the windows down and the radio up a bit. My route was mostly out in the rural parts, which I didn't mind. Grew up around here, so country roads were home to me. I knew all the usual critters, deer all the time, squirrels, rabbits darting across the road, the occasional coyote slipping through the fields, even saw a bobcat once way off in the distance. Nothing ever bothered me, it was just nature, part of the landscape. That particular day, my youngest Tommy was with me. Summer break and all. He was probably around 10 then, maybe 11. Just a kid, glued to his Game Boy, probably playing Pokemon or something. Didn't pay much attention to the world outside the car, which, honestly, was pretty typical for him at that age. I was cruising along Route 32, the main road, doing my usual thing, tossing papers into boxes, when I had to turn off onto 43A. That's where things got different. Route 43A wasn't paved, just gravel. It was a downhill stretch heading into this area folks around here call Lament Valley. Sounds creepy, right? Never thought much about the name before, to be honest. But after, it kind of fits. As soon as I turned onto 43A, it felt different. Not scary different, just quieter. Route 32 has a bit of traffic even out in the country. 43A? Nothing. Just the crunch of the gravel under my tires. The trees on either side got thicker, taller, started feeling like we were driving into a tunnel of green. Still sunny, mind you. Sun was filtering through the leaves, but it was shadier, cooler. The air felt heavier somehow. I was just humming along to some old country song on the radio, thinking about what to make for dinner that night, you know, normal stuff. Tommy was still beeping away on his Game Boy, probably trying to catch a virtual Pikachu or whatever kids were doing then. Then it happened, just like that. No warning, no sound, nothing to prepare me for it. We rounded a bend, a pretty mild bend, nothing crazy, and there it was. Maybe 50 yards ahead of us, something crossed the road. At first, my mind couldn't even process what I was seeing. It was just big, really, really big, and dark, like deep shadow dark, even in the dappled sunlight. It wasn't a deer, not even close. Deer are graceful, quick, they bound. This thing, it moved in a completely different way. It was upright, walking on 2 legs, and it was tall, taller than anything I've ever seen in real life. I'm not a small person, I'm about 5'7", but this thing, it must have been 7 feet, maybe more. 7.5? I don't know. I'm terrible at guessing heights, but it was huge and solid, massive. It crossed the road in like 2, maybe 3 steps. That's how big it was, how long its legs must have been. From one side of the road to the other in a blink. It was moving from the left side of the road to the right, going towards the woods. According to the map, the left side would have been coming from the Benton Furness Experimental Forest, big chunk of woods out that way. The right side, where it went into, was heading towards Raccoon Creek, denser woods even. I saw it clearly, I mean as clear as day. It was hairy, covered in dark hair, like really coarse hair. Brownish black, maybe more black in the shadows. Hard to say for sure because it was so quick, but definitely hair. Not fur like a dog or a bear, but hair, almost matted looking, and its arms. They were long, really long, hanging down, swinging as it moved, seemed to reach almost to its knees. It just strode across the road like it owned it, like we were nothing, like it didn't even see us. Its build was powerful, thick, not like fat, not at all, muscular. You could feel the strength radiating off of it even from that distance, even in that split second. Its shoulders were broad, its chest was... Well, I didn't really get a good look at its chest, but the overall impression was just immense. The head, I only caught a glimpse. It was set low on its shoulders, no real neck to speak of. It was dark, shadowed by the hair or something, but I remember thinking it looked flat, wide and flat, and maybe kind of pointy at the top. Again, it was so fast, my brain was scrambling to catch up. The whole thing probably lasted no more than 2 or 3 seconds, start to finish. It was there, crossing the road, and then it was gone, swallowed up by the trees on the other side. I remember I just gasped, a real, loud gasp. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My heart went into overdrive, pounding in my chest like it wanted to break free. "Tommy!" I yelled, voice coming out all shaky. "Tommy, did you see that? Did you see that thing?" He didn't even flinch, just kept beeping away at his Game Boy. "See what, Mom?" he mumbled, not even looking up. That thing that just crossed the road." I could barely get the words out. My throat felt tight like I was trying to swallow a golf ball. "That big, dark thing." He finally looked up, annoyed. "What? A deer?" He rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. "Mom, you always see deer." "No, Tommy, not a deer. It was huge. It was walking, on 2 legs, like Bigfoot." The words just blurted out. Bigfoot. I hadn't even thought the word until it came out of my mouth, but that's what it was. That's the only thing it could have been. He frowned at me like I was speaking Martian. "Bigfoot? Mom, seriously? You believe in Bigfoot?" I don't know what I believe," I stammered. "But I saw something, Tommy. I know what I saw. It was massive and hairy and walking upright, right there, 50 yards in front of us." I pointed at the spot where it had disappeared into the woods. He looked in the direction I was pointing, then back at me, still with that skeptical teenage eye roll, even though he was only 10. "Mom, I was looking out the window on the other side. I didn't see anything, probably just a bear or something." "A bear!" I practically shouted. "Tommy, this was not a bear. Bears don't walk like that. Bears aren't that tall. Bears aren't that." I just couldn't find the words to describe what I had seen. "It wasn't a bear," I repeated, quieter this time but with more conviction. "I know what I saw. And it wasn't a bear." I pulled the car over right then and there, just slammed on the brakes and put it in park, gravel spitting up behind us. I turned off the engine and just sat there. The silence rushed in, even heavier now than before. The only sounds were the cicadas buzzing in the trees and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, and my own breath coming in ragged gasps. Tommy went back to his Game Boy. Kids, right? Completely oblivious sometimes. But I couldn't take my eyes off the woods, off the spot where that thing had gone in. Every shadow looked darker, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. My skin prickled all over like I was being watched. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to go look, to see if there were tracks, to see if there was anything. But my feet felt like they were glued to the floorboards. Fear, real, cold fear, had just paralyzed me. I'd never felt fear like that before. It wasn't the fear of something jumping out and attacking me, not exactly. It was a deeper, more primal fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of something so far outside my normal understanding of the world. I sat there for I don't know how long. Felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. Longest few minutes of my life. Finally, I managed to unclench my hands from the steering wheel. They were white-knuckled, aching. I took a deep breath, tried to calm my racing heart. "Okay," I said, mostly to myself. "Okay, Betty, just calm down." I put the car back in drive, very slowly, very carefully, and started moving again. Down Route 43A. Each curve, each shadow seemed to hold something, waiting. I kept glancing at the woods on either side of the road, my eyes straining, trying to see. What? I didn't even know, just something, anything. But there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. And the feeling that I wasn't alone out there, that something was out there, watching me maybe. It was the most unsettling feeling I'd ever experienced. The rest of my delivery route that day was a blur. I went through the motions, tossing papers, driving, but my mind was still back there on Route 43A, replaying that moment over and over again. That dark shape crossing the road, the sheer size of it, the way it moved. I didn't talk to Tommy about it again that day. He'd already dismissed it, and honestly, I didn't want to keep talking about it either. It felt too real, too raw, like if I talked about it more, it would somehow become even more real, more terrifying. When I got home that evening, I didn't tell my husband either. I just kept it to myself. I felt foolish somehow, like I'd imagined it, or exaggerated it, even though I knew deep down that I hadn't. I'd seen something real, something other. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe it was just a really, really big deer, standing on its hind legs somehow. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But none of those explanations fit. None of them came close to explaining what I had actually seen. The next few days, I avoided Route 43A like the plague. I got someone else to cover that part of my route. I just couldn't bring myself to go back there. The thought of driving down that gravel road again, of seeing those trees closing in, it made my stomach clench. But you can't avoid things forever, especially not when you live out in the country. Eventually, I had to go back. A few weeks later, I had to cover someone else's route, and it included 43A. I dreaded it the whole day leading up to it. My hands were sweating as I made the turn onto the gravel. But nothing happened. Just the trees, the shadows, the quiet. It was anticlimactic, almost disappointing. I started to think maybe I had been imagining things. Maybe it was just stress or lack of sleep or something. Then, the following spring. I love morel mushrooms. Springtime, when the morels are popping up, that's my favorite time of year. I know a few good spots around here, places where they grow thick. One of those places is near Lament Valley, not too far from Route 43A, near Raccoon Creek. I went out one morning early, hoping to get a good haul. It was a beautiful morning. The woods were green and fresh, birds were singing. It was peaceful. I was walking through the trees, eyes scanning the ground, looking for those telltale honeycomb caps of morels, when I came to a small clearing. And that's when I saw them. Twisted trees. Not just any twisted trees. These were big trees, mature trees, oaks and maples, some of them, and they were twisted, like someone had grabbed them by the trunk and just wrenched them. They weren't snapped, not exactly, they were contorted. The trunks were bent, the branches were gnarled, reaching out at unnatural angles. It was like a giant hand had come through and played with them, twisting them and warping them like they were made of rubber. And they were all grouped together in a cluster. Right there, near Raccoon Creek, not far from where I'd seen it. That's when it hit me. That feeling, that cold dread, that primal fear. It came flooding back. I remembered the size, the strength of that thing. And I looked at those twisted trees, at the sheer force it must have taken to do that to them. And it clicked. It wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It wasn't a bear or a deer or anything normal. It was something else. Something powerful. Something we don't understand. I didn't find any morals that day. I turned around and went straight home. I haven't been back to that part of the woods since. And to this day, I can't explain what I saw. I know what I saw, but I don't understand it. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Sometimes late at night when everything's quiet, I think about it, about that dark shape in the road, and I wonder, what was it? What was out there in the woods that day? And is it still there? It's been years, decades almost. But the feeling of pure, unadulterated fear, that chills you to the bone fear, that feeling stays with me. And every time I drive down a country road, especially near dusk, when the shadows get long and the woods get darker, I can't help but look, just a little bit, just to see, just in case. Because you never know, do you? You just never know. And that's my story. I know it sounds crazy. I know people will probably laugh or say I imagined it, or tell me it was just a bear. But I know what I saw. And I know it changed something in me that day. Something broke open, maybe. Some part of me that used to feel safe, used to feel like I knew the world. That part is gone now, and it's never come back. Story 6. Man, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It happened back in 2015, and even now, years later, I can't shake it. Tar Hollow's always been a place I've gone hunting, since I was a kid practically. I know that forest like the back of my hand. Thought I did anyway. It started with little things, weird stuff you could maybe explain away, but put 'em all together and, well, it just ain't normal. The first time it was coon hunting. Me and a couple of buddies, we went out there one night. Flashlights, dogs baying at every rustle. We were deep in, past where most folks bother going. Pitch black under the trees. You know how it gets in Tar Hollow. Just the beams of our lights cutting through the dark and the sounds of the woods. Then we heard it. Something big moving, crashing through the brush. Not like a deer, not like any animal I know. This was heavy, like something huge. Branches snapping like twigs, leaves crunching under weight. My dogs, they perked up, went on point like they'd treed something, but their tails weren't wagging. They were stiff, ears pinned forward, that low growl rumbling in their chests. The kind they do when they're not just tracking something, but they're spooked too. We swung our lights towards the sound, held 'em steady, and that crashing, it just stopped. Dead quiet. You know that kind of quiet that's louder than any noise. That's what it was. Just the rustle of leaves in the night breeze and our own breathing, heavy in our ears. We stood there for a minute, maybe longer, lights shining into the thick brush, trying to see something, anything. But nothing. Just shadows, tree trunks, the usual woods at night. Figured it was a bear, maybe. Though bears aren't really that common in that part of Ohio, or at least weren't back then. But what else could make that kind of noise? We told ourselves it was a bear and started to move on, trying to shake off that weird feeling creeping up our backs. Then it happened. Wham! A rock, a good-sized rock, came flying out of the woods, right in our direction. Landed maybe 20-30 feet in front of us, kicked up dirt, not rolled, thrown. Like someone or something had picked it up and chucked it at us. Dude, we froze. Heart pounding in my chest, could feel it banging against my ribs. We swung our lights back to where the sound had come from, adrenaline surging, ready for I don't know what. But again, nothing. Just the woods, still and silent, except now, it felt different. Heavy, like we were being watched, even though we couldn't see a thing. My dogs, they tucked tail and ran back to us, whimpering, bumping into our legs. They were done. No more coon hunting for them that night. And honestly, we were too. We called the dogs back, and we got the hell out of there. Didn't say much on the way back to the truck, just walked fast, kept looking over our shoulders. Tried to joke about it later. Maybe some kids messing around, but none of us really bought it. Too far out, too late at night, too damn deliberate. The second time wasn't much later that same year. Foolishly, maybe, we decided to go back to the same spot. We chalked the first time up to being spooked. Maybe our imaginations getting the better of us. Needed to prove it was nothing, I guess. Same deal, night hunting coons, same buddies, same dogs. We drove out to our spot, got the truck parked, ready to unload the dogs. Opened the tailgate, ready to let them out, and then it happened again. That sound, only this time it was even louder, closer, sounded like a damn freight train crashing through the woods, something massive, tearing through everything in its path, coming right at us, and it was moving fast, really fast, uphill through thick woods, like nothing could stop it. It was terrifying. Not just the noise, but the force of it. You could feel the vibrations in the ground. The air felt different, and it was loud, ear-splitting loud, worse than any thunderstorm. It was gone as fast as it came, moved right past us, uphill, and then silence. We just stood there, frozen, staring into the woods, listening to the echoes die down. Dogs hadn't even gotten out of the truck bed. They were huddled together, whining, shaking like leaves. They weren't jumping to get out, weren't barking, weren't doing anything except trying to disappear into the truck bed. We tried to coax them out, but they wouldn't budge, wouldn't even look at the woods. They just kept whimpering, eyes wide with fear. That's when we knew for sure it wasn't our imaginations this time. Dogs aren't stupid. They know when something's wrong, something ain't natural, and they were terrified. We slammed the tailgate shut, loaded up, and got out of there. Didn't even think about hunting that night, or going back to that spot again. We were done with that cursed place. But then came the third time, the one that really messed me up. Late fall, beautiful day, leaves turning, crisp air, perfect for a trail ride. My daughter Lily, she was maybe 14 then, horse crazy, wanted to go riding in Tar Hollow. Figured during the day it'd be different. Sunlight, open woods, what could go wrong? Took a buddy, Mark, with us, just to be safe, trailered the horses out there. We were riding up on a ridge, beautiful view looking out over the forest. Sun was shining, leaves were crunching under the horses' hooves, birds were singing. Seemed like a normal, peaceful day, until my mare, Belle, started acting up. Belle's usually calm as can be, trail horse through and through, but she started getting fidgety, stopping every few minutes, pinning her ears back, looking over her shoulder, relinching nervous little snorts. Figured maybe she just stepped on a rock or something. Checked her feet, nothing there. Tried to reassure her, patted her neck, but she stayed edgy. We kept riding, figuring she'd settle down. Got to the top of the first ridge, started down into a little dip, then up to another ridge. As we climbed the second ridge, Belle got worse, stopping more often, pulling back on the reins, swinging her head around, eyes rolling white. She was really spooked now, and I couldn't figure out why. Nothing visible, no strange smells, just the normal woods. Then she stopped dead, planted her feet, wouldn't move, just stood there trembling, staring back the way we'd come, relinching loud and sharp this time, a real fear cry. And finally, we saw what had her so freaked out. At first, I didn't see anything, just the trees on the ridge we'd just been on, maybe 300 yards back. Then I looked closer, and there it was. Back on that first ridge, peering out from behind a big oak tree, a head. A dark head, huge. It was so dark, almost black against the brown and green of the trees, and big, massive. From where we were, I could see it from the top of its head down to its shoulders, maybe. The rest of it was hidden by the tree trunk. But even at that distance, I could tell it was enormous, way bigger than any animal should be. It wasn't moving, just watching us, still as a statue, just that dark shape against the trees, those eyes. I think I saw eyes. Hard to be sure at that distance, in the shadows, but it felt like it was staring right at us. Intense, heavy. My mind raced. Bear? Too big. Wrong shape. Wrong color. Deer? Hell no. This was something else. Something I'd never seen before, never even imagined, and the size of it. Even from that far away, I estimated its head and shoulders alone were as tall as I was on horseback. 8 feet easy, maybe more. Terror gripped me, cold and hard. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but there it was, plain as day. And Belle, she knew. Horses are sensitive. They can feel things we can't. She was practically screaming with fear. I didn't say anything to Lily or Mark at first, just stared, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. But it didn't go away. It stayed there, watching. Finally, Mark noticed Belle's agitation, and he followed her gaze back to the ridge. He saw it too. I could see it in his face, the blood drain out, his eyes go wide with disbelief. Lily, she was looking back and forth between us, confused and scared. "What is it, Dad? What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want to scare her, but I knew I had to say something. "Don't panic, okay? Just look back there on the ridge, behind that big tree. Do you see it?" She squinted, her eyes widening. I think so. Is that a bear?" "I don't think so," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what it is, but it's big, and it's watching us." We didn't move for what felt like forever, just stared at that dark shape in the woods, and it stared back. Then, slowly, I started to turn Belle around. "We need to go," I said, keeping my voice calm for Lily's sake, but inside I was freaking out. "Let's just head back to camp. Slowly, don't run, just easy." We turned our horses and started back the way we'd come, towards the horse camp where we'd parked the trailers. Kept glancing back, and sure enough, it was still there on the ridge watching us. As we rode, it started to move, not running, just following, staying on the ridge, keeping pace with us, moving through the trees. We'd catch glimpses of it now and then, that dark shape moving through the shadows. It followed us all the way back to the horse camp. Parked right by the trailers, just a clearing in the woods, nothing fancy. By the time we got there, the sun was starting to go down, shadows getting longer. That thing was still on the ridge overlooking the camp, maybe a little closer now, just standing there, watching. We unloaded the horses fast, got them tied to the trailers, and got ourselves into the truck. Locking the doors felt stupid, like it wouldn't do any good against whatever that thing was. But it was something to do. Sat in the truck for a while, just watching the woods, watching that ridge. Darkness started to fall fast, and the woods got darker, shadows deeper. Couldn't see it anymore, not clearly anyway, but we knew it was still out there. Could feel it. That feeling of being watched, like something was out there in the dark, just waiting. We decided to stay the night. Stupid maybe looking back, but we were too spooked to pack up in the dark with that thing out there. Figured maybe it would go away if we just stayed put, acted normal. Made a fire, cooked some dinner, tried to talk normal, tried to pretend everything was okay, but it wasn't. We were all on edge, jumping at every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves. Later, after dark, when the fire had died down to embers, it started. First, just little pebbles ticking off the side of the horse trailer, like acorns falling from the trees. Then bigger rocks, thrown harder, thump, thump, hitting the trailer, hitting the ground around us, not aimed at us exactly, more like testing us, letting us know it was still there. The horses went nuts, stomping, pulling at their ties, whinnying in terror. Belle, she was really losing it. She reared back, snapped her lead rope, and bolted. Just took off into the darkness, crashing through the underbrush, gone. Panic. Damn horse was gone in the dark with that thing out there. Couldn't just leave her. Had to go find her. Stupid, stupid, stupid idea, but what else could I do? Told Mark to stay with Lily, keep the fire going, stay in the truck if things got worse. Grabbed my flashlight, my rifle, and went after Belle. Into the dark woods, alone. Every shadow looked like it. Every rustle of leaves sounded like it moving closer. Heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Flashlight beam dancing around, catching glimpses of trees, bushes, shadows, nothing else. But the feeling, That feeling of being watched stronger than ever, like it was right there, just outside the beam of my light, moving with me, waiting. Called Belle's name, whistled for her, but no response. Just the sounds of the woods, and the beating of my own heart, and that cold dread creeping up my spine. Went deeper into the woods, calling, searching, fear clawing at me. Finally, after what felt like hours, found her. She was tangled in some brush, down near a creek, shaking, panting, eyes wide with terror. She was okay, just scared. Managed to calm her down, got her untangled, checked her over, and started walking her back to camp. Every step back, I expected to see it. Expected it to step out of the shadows, block my path. Gun was in my hands, safety off, finger on the trigger, but what good would that do against something like that? Didn't even know what it was, what to expect. Just that feeling of overwhelming size, power, darkness. Got back to camp. Mark and Lily were white as ghosts. Fire was almost out. Shadows were closing in. Got Belle tied up again, tighter this time. We didn't sleep a wink that night. Just sat there in the truck, listening to the woods, watching the shadows, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Just the sounds of the night. The rustling leaves, the creaking branches, and that feeling, that constant icy feeling of being watched. Morning came, slow and grey, packed up fast, horses still spooked, Lily silent and pale, Mark just as shaken. Got in the trucks, got out of Tar Hollow, didn't look back. Never went back to Tar Hollow after that. Not hunting, not riding, not ever. Don't know what it was we saw that day, don't want to know. Something big, something dark, something wrong. And it's still out there, somewhere in those woods. I know it is. Sometimes late at night when everything's quiet, I still think about it, still feel that cold dread. And I wonder, is it still watching? Story 7. It was June 2015. Yeah, feels like ages ago now. But that night, it was just a normal summer night, you know. Warm but not too hot. That kind of air that feels thick but nice on your skin. We were all at Clara's place. Clara was different. Lived way out, past Amesville, Athens County. Middle of nowhere, really. She had this old house, surrounded by woods like proper woods, not just a few trees in your backyard. And she had a bunch of kids, like a whole lot. 8, I think. Yeah, 8 kids running around. Wild bunch, but sweet. Anyway, a few of us girls, friends from way back, we'd planned to hang out at Clara's. Just a chill night, campfire, catching up. Her place was perfect for it. She had this fire pit out back, away from the house, deep in her yard, right on the edge of the woods. We got there as it was getting dark. The sun was just dipping down, and it was that beautiful twilight blue, you know? We piled into her backyard, dragged some logs over to sit on. Clara got the fire going. It was good. Just what we needed. We hadn't all been together in a while. Crackling fire, smell of wood smoke, talking, laughing about stupid stuff, remembering old times, normal stuff. Just girls hanging out. Then it happened. We were talking about some TV show, I can't even remember what anymore, when there was this crack. Not like a little crack, like when a branch snaps. No, this was huge. Like a building falling down. Just this enormous, deafening crack that echoed through the woods. The fire popped, sparks flew up in the air, and for a second everything just went completely silent, except for the fire crackling again. We all jumped. Seriously jumped, spilled our drinks, yelped, heart in my throat instantly. We all looked around like, what the hell was that? It was a still night, completely still, no wind, nothing, just quiet. Then this massive crack out of nowhere. What was that? Someone yelled. Maybe it was Lisa, I can't remember exactly who spoke first, we were all talking at once. Sounded like thunder, but there's no clouds, another one said. And it was true. Sky was clear as anything. No chance of thunder. My eyes went straight to Clara. She was sitting there right by the fire, kind of leaning back on a log, watching the flames. She didn't jump like the rest of us, didn't even flinch, I don't think. She just looked calm, too calm, almost. I was staring at her, and I was about to ask her what she thought it was, when she just smiled. Not a normal smile either. It was a small smile, almost like she knew something we didn't. And then she winked at me. Winked. I swear she winked. I thought, what the hell? Why would she wink? It was such a weird, creepy wink. Like she was in on some joke, but it wasn't a joke. This giant noise in the middle of nowhere, and she winks? It just didn't fit. "Clara, what was that?" I asked, voice probably shaky. She just shrugged, still smiling a little. "Just a tree, probably. Woods are full of them." She said it like it was nothing, like trees just randomly explode and make the loudest noise you've ever heard on a totally still night. But her smile and the wink, that bothered me way more than the noise itself. It was like she knew something, and she wasn't telling us. Or maybe she was telling me in some weird way, with that wink. We all kind of went quiet after that. Still talked, but the mood shifted. The air felt different. I couldn't shake off that feeling, that weird vibe Clara had put out there with that wink and that smile. I kept glancing at her, trying to read her face, but she was just there. Normal, but not normal, if that makes sense. The sky started to get properly dark then. The blue went deep, deep purple, and then black started creeping in. The fire was burning down a bit. The flames were lower, more orange and red now. It was getting that time where people start thinking about heading home. A couple of the girls, Lisa and Beth, started packing up their stuff, getting their bags together, saying goodbyes. They'd parked out front, by the road, like everyone else. Clara's driveway was long, went all the way from the house through the woods to the main road, maybe like 100 yards, maybe more. Cars were all parked along the driveway closest to the road. That's when Clara said it, just out of nowhere, and her voice changed. It went sharp, different. All the calmness, the weird smile, gone. Now she sounded scared, or something like scared, I don't know. It was tight, tense. She pointed towards the front of the property, towards the driveway, where the cars were parked. "Who is that near the cars?" Just like that, flat, direct. And I could hear the edge in her voice, even though the words themselves were just asking a question. But it wasn't a question. It was like she already knew the answer, and the answer was bad. My heart did that flip thing again. Everything just went cold inside me. I followed where she was pointing. It was darker now, properly dark, except for the firelight behind us and the little bit of light that was still left in the sky over the trees. But out towards the driveway it was dark. Shadows, trees all around, dark shapes against the darker sky. And then I saw it, by one of the cars. A white car looked like Beth's. Next to it, there was something, standing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes even though I knew I was seeing it. It was there, a figure, grey, tall, way too tall. It was next to Beth's car, parked in the driveway, and it was towering over it, seriously towering. The roof of Beth's car is normal car height, you know? Average. This thing, it was easily twice the height of the car roof, maybe more. I stared, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think properly for a second, just staring at this impossible thing standing there by the cars. It was grey, like washed-out grey, like fog or smoke, but solid. Kind of blurry around the edges, but still there, definitely there. Not like a shadow playing tricks or my eyes messing with me. This was a thing. It was upright, standing on two legs, humanoid shape kind of, but wrong. So wrong. It was too tall, way too tall. And its shoulders, they were broad, like massive, wide and solid. It didn't look bulky, not exactly fat or anything, just huge. Big shoulders, long limbs, towering height, grey. There. I glanced back at the fire, quickly looked at all the girls. Lisa and Beth were still by the fire, packing up. Another friend, Sarah, was poking the embers with a stick. Another, Maria, was finishing her drink. Everyone was there. Everyone we came with was right there, around the fire. No one was missing. No one had wandered off towards the cars. And then the absolute terror hit me, because that figure by the cars, it wasn't one of us. It wasn't anyone I knew. It wasn't human. I felt this ice flood through my veins, cold, bone-deep cold, mixed with this jolt of pure, raw fear. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would explode. My hands went numb. Everything just froze, except my eyes, glued to that thing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. I wanted to warn everyone, but I couldn't make a sound. My voice was stuck. My throat was locked up. Fear, pure terror, just clamped down on me. Clara was still staring. I could feel her eyes on it too, even without looking at her. We were both seeing it. I wasn't crazy. It was real. Whatever it was real. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. 1 second it was there, this towering grey shape by the white car. The next second, empty driveway. Just trees and darkness and cars parked along the side. Nothing. Completely vanished. I blinked again, harder this time. Looked around, frantic. Looked back at the cars. Nothing. Just gone. Like it had never been there, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I know I hadn't. Clara had seen it too. She'd pointed it out. She'd asked, "Who is that?" I turned to Clara, finally able to move a little. My voice came out as a croak, whispery and thin. Did you see that?" She nodded, face white, pale as paper. Her eyes were wide, dark in the firelight. She swallowed hard, her throat working. She looked as scared as I felt, maybe even more. "Yeah," she whispered back, voice barely audible above the fire crackling. "Yeah, I saw it." We just stared at each other for a moment, just breathing, trying to catch our breath. The other girls were still oblivious, still chatting, packing up, completely unaware of what we had just seen. Right there, standing by their cars. What was it?" I finally managed to ask. Still a whisper, voice shaky. Clara just shook her head, slowly. I don't know," she said quietly. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes were filled with fear, yes, but also something else. Recognition, resignation, something deeper, something more knowing. The other girls started saying goodbye properly now, hugs all around. "See you later. Drive safe." Lisa and Beth headed towards their cars. They walked right past the spot where that thing had been standing, walked right past it, laughing, chatting, not seeing a thing. It was like we were in a different world, Clara and me. Like we'd stepped out of reality for a minute and seen something behind it, and then stepped back, and everyone else was still in the normal world, hadn't noticed a thing. As the girls drove off, headlights sweeping across the driveway, illuminating the trees, the empty space where it had been. It was gone. Really gone. Like a bad dream that fades when you wake up. But it wasn't a dream. We both saw it. Once everyone was gone, just me and Clara left by the dying fire, the woods around us dark and silent. Then I asked her properly, "Clara, what the hell was that? Seriously, what was that thing?" She was quiet for a long time, just staring into the embers. The fire was almost out now, just glowing red coals and wisps of smoke. The darkness felt thicker, heavier, pressing in around us from the trees. Finally she sighed, a deep, shaky sigh. I think it was a Bigfoot. Bigfoot, just like that. Like it was an everyday thing to see a Bigfoot in your driveway. I stared at her. Bigfoot? Seriously? Like in the stories? She nodded slowly, still not looking at me, just at the dying fire. Yeah, like in the stories. But Bigfoot isn't real, is it? I mean, I'd heard stories, yeah, everyone has, but real. standing there next to a car, towering over it. It sounded crazy, absolutely insane. She finally looked up at me then. Her eyes were serious, dark and serious. "Sarah," she said, voice low, I think it is real, and I think it's been around here for a while." "Around here? Here, like, here on your property?" I felt a fresh wave of chills run down my spine. My skin prickled. The hairs on my arms stood up. She nodded again. "Yeah, here. I've seen things, heard things I couldn't explain. Noises in the woods, footsteps when there's no one there, branches breaking, things moving in the dark." I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was animals or my imagination. "But," I prompted, feeling my throat tighten again. "But tonight was different. Tonight was clear. I saw it. You saw it." She looked around at the dark woods surrounding us. I think it's been watching us, watching the house, watching the kids." Watching the kids. My voice went even quieter. That was terrifying. The thought of that thing, that huge, grey, impossible creature watching her kids, her 8 kids, running around in these woods. "Yeah," she said again, voice barely a whisper now. I think that's why it's here. Maybe it's attracted to them. I don't know. I don't understand it, but I'm scared, Sarah, really scared." And I believed her. I really did. Looking at her face in the dying firelight, seeing the real fear in her eyes, I knew she wasn't making it up. She wasn't joking. She was genuinely terrified. And so was I. We didn't talk much more that night. The fire went out completely, leaving us in total darkness, except for the faint glow of the stars above the trees. We went inside, locked all the doors, closed all the windows. The house felt different now. It had been cozy, welcoming when we arrived. Now it felt exposed, vulnerable, like we were surrounded and watched. I stayed at Clara's that night. Couldn't imagine driving home alone after seeing that. Sleep? Yeah, right. Neither of us slept much. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the windows, every shadow. It felt like it out there, watching, waiting. I left early the next morning as soon as it was properly light. Sun was up, birds were singing, normal daylight sounds. It felt safer in the daylight. But still, driving away, looking back at Clara's house, surrounded by those woods, I couldn't shake the feeling, the fear, and honestly I still can't. It's been years since that night. Years since I saw that thing. But I still think about it. Sometimes I'll be driving at night through woods and I'll see a shadow in the trees and my heart will skip a beat. I'll remember that grey figure towering over the car, those broad shoulders, that impossible height. I never went back to Clara's place after that. We stayed friends, talked on the phone, sometimes met up in town. But I couldn't bring myself to go back to her house. Not after seeing that. Not knowing what she thinks is out there in those woods, watching. I don't know what it was. I don't have any explanation. Bigfoot? Maybe. Something else? Maybe. All I know is I saw something that night. Something that shouldn't be possible. Something that scared me more than anything else in my life. And I can't explain it. And I'll never forget it. Ever. It just happened. And then it was gone. And that's it. Still gives me chills just thinking about it right now. Story 8. My place is kind of out there. 52 acres and backs right up to woods that go on forever pretty much. 3 sides of my property, just trees. Down the road maybe 10 miles you hit the Ohio River. Kentucky's right across. Total middle of nowhere. That's how I like it. Keeps people away. Anyway, there I was, minding my own business, enjoying the peace when I heard it. Just a snap like a branch breaking out in the woods behind the house. Didn't think much of it, could be anything. Deer, raccoon, who knows. But then there was this noise. It was low, real deep, kind of a grunt, but wetter sounding almost. Guttural. Made the hairs on my arms stand up a little, not gonna lie. Curiosity got the better of me, I guess. Stood up, went inside, grabbed my maglite from beside the door. Old thing, heavy as hell, but the beam's strong. Walked back out onto the porch, flicked it on, and pointed it towards where I heard the sound. At first, nothing. Just trees, shadows, the usual dark shapes playing tricks on your eyes. Then I moved the beam a little to the right, just uphill a bit. And that's when I saw it, standing there, maybe 60, 70 yards into the woods, on the slope. Just standing there. At first, in that quick flash of light, I honestly thought it was a deer. Big one, maybe? We get some decent bucks around here. But then the light caught it right, and I froze. Just rooted to the spot. It wasn't a deer, not even close. It was upright, like a person, but not. Taller, way taller, and thicker, bulkier. My flashlight beam was full on it now, and I could see it clear as day. It was covered in hair, dark hair, shaggy looking. Not like a bear, more coarse, almost matted. The way it stood, though, that was what got me. Completely upright, balanced, like it was born to stand that way, like it was natural. I remember just staring, heart starting to pound in my chest, but not exactly from fear, not at first. More like disbelief. My mind was trying to catch up to what my eyes were showing me, and it was struggling. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. Then the smell hit me. Jesus, the smell, like a wet dog but turned up to 11, musky, fecal, just rank. Filled my nostrils, even across that distance. That's when the initial shock started to bleed into something else, something closer to unease. We just stood there, both of us, locked in place. Me with the flashlight beam trained on it just watching me. I could see its face in the light, though it was shadowy, kinda hidden by the hair around it. But I could make out eyes, dark eyes, reflective, like an animal's, but intelligent. Like it was studying me, as much as I was studying it. Time. It kinda stretched out in that moment. Felt like minutes, could have been less, could have been more. Hard to say. I just remember staring and it staring back. And in that stare, there wasn't any aggression. That's the weirdest part. I should have been terrified. I should have been running back inside, locking the door, grabbing my shotgun. But I wasn't. I was just fascinated. Completely and utterly fascinated. There was something about its eyes. They were curious, just like I was curious. It wasn't threatening, at least not that I could sense. More like it was just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. Like we'd both stumbled into something unexpected, and that smell, as awful as it was, even that felt almost normal in a messed up way. Like it was part of this whole weird tableau, this impossible thing standing in the woods, just looking at me. It was primal. Everything about it felt ancient and wild. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, I don't think. Just held my breath, held the flashlight steady, and kept looking. It was tall, I'm telling you, even from that distance. Has to have been 8 feet easy, maybe more. Built solid too, like a linebacker, but somehow different, more massive, and the way it stood, so sure of itself, so present. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it moved, but not like it was startled or running away. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its back to me. Just turned, as smooth as you please, and started walking uphill, deeper into the woods. It didn't hurry, didn't break into a run or anything frantic, just walked. And as it walked, it faded. Not like it disappeared into thin air, but the shadows seemed to just swallow it up. The darkness just absorbed it, and it was gone. Just like that. 1 minute this thing was there, standing in front of me, and the next, it was just gone. Like it had never been there at all, except for the smell that hung in the air for a good long while afterwards, and the image burned into my brain. I stood there for what felt like forever, flashlight still pointed in the direction it had gone, listening, trying to hear anything, Rustling leaves, snapping branches, anything to show it was still out there. But nothing. Just the crickets again, the quiet night sounds, like it had just vanished. Slowly, I lowered the flashlight. My hand was shaking a little, I noticed. Took a deep breath, and that smell hit me again, fainter now, but still there, like a ghost of something foul. I walked back inside. Porch felt empty, suddenly cold even though the night was still thick with humidity. Shut the door, locked it, went into the living room, sat down in my recliner. Still had the cigarette stub in my hand, hadn't even finished it. Threw it in the ashtray. Hands were still shaking. I went over everything in my head, again and again, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it was a deer, or a bear, or something normal. But it wasn't. It couldn't have been. I know what deer look like. I know what bears look like. And this was nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. The size, the way it stood, the smell, those eyes, those intelligent, curious eyes. It wasn't some animal lost in the woods. It was something else. I didn't sleep much that night, just kept replaying it in my head. Every detail, every sensation, the smell, the sound of the branch breaking, the weight of the flashlight in my hand, the way the light caught its fur, those eyes. When the sun came up, I went back out on the porch. Everything looked normal, too normal almost, like the night before had been some kind of weird dream. But the smell was still faint in the morning air. A lingering reminder that it hadn't been. I walked out to where I'd seen it, used the daylight to see if I could find anything, tracks or anything. The ground was hard-packed dirt and pine needles, not easy to track on. I looked, but nothing. No broken branches, no flattened grass, no footprints, nothing. Just woods. Normal woods. It's been years now, over a decade, and I still think about it. Almost every day. Talked to a few people about it back then. My brother, a couple of guys at the gas station, told them I saw something big in the woods, something weird. They just laughed, told me I was seeing things, or had one too many beers. Figured I was just spooked by a deer, didn't push it, didn't want to sound crazy. But I know what I saw. I know what I saw. And it wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it was something else. Something I can't explain. Something I still can't wrap my head around. I haven't seen it again since that night. Haven't heard anything like that grunt again either. Life went back to normal, more or less. But normal feels different now. I know there's more out there than we think. Out there in the woods, in the dark places. Things we don't understand. Things we can't explain. And sometimes, late at night when it's quiet and I'm sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette, I still look out into the woods, just for a second, just to see if anything's looking back. And every time I smell a wet dog, especially that musky, rank kind of wet dog smell, yeah, it still gives me the chills. Every single time. I don't know what it was. I probably never will. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. Never. Story 9. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, even now, all these years later. You guys remember that derecho back in June of 2012, and how the heat just clamped down after that? Felt like the air itself was thick enough to choke on. 100 degrees every damn day, for like a week straight. People talked about the heat all the time, about the storms and the power outages. But what I remember, well, it's different. See, my buddies and I, we were big into bikes and ATVs back then, always out tearing up trails. Wayne National Forest, that was our playground, especially out in Hawking County. Real remote out there. We'd meet up in Logan, grab some greasy food, map out our ride for the day or night, and then head out. That heat wave, though? Daytime riding was just brutal. You'd be soaked in sweat 5 minutes in, the air so heavy it felt like breathing underwater. So we started riding at night, figured it'd be cooler, and it was, a little. Still muggy, you know, sticky, but at least the sun wasn't beating down on you. We knew the woods pretty well. We'd explored a lot of it, finding little trails. Some of them probably weren't even legal. Hawking County especially, it's got hills and hollows, ridges and dips, all packed tight with woods. And caves. Man, there are caves all over the place in there, tucked away. We knew a few, not like official tourist caves, just holes in the ground, really, some bigger than others. Never really messed with them, mostly just knew they were there. This one night, it was probably a week into that heat wave. The air was still thick as soup, even after the sun went down. We met up like usual, had some burgers, talked about the usual crap, work, girls, bikes. Decided to hit a trail system we hadn't been on in a while, out in the deeper part of the forest. We rode our bikes to the trailhead, unloaded the ATVs, geared up. Headlights cut paths through the dark, bouncing off the trees. It was actually kind of beautiful, the way the light would catch fireflies and dew on the leaves. Peaceful almost. We were riding for maybe an hour, maybe a bit more, just enjoying the night. It was quieter in the woods then. The usual daytime sounds of birds and squirrels were gone. Just the buzz of our engines and the rustle of leaves. We were on a pretty narrow trail, one of the rougher ones, lots of rocks and ruts. My buddy, Mark, he was leading, me right behind him. Then it happened. He took a turn a little too wide, and his ATV went right into this mud hole. Not just any mud hole, but a real deep one. The kind where you think it's shallow and then, bam, you're axle deep. He gunned the engine, trying to power through, but it just spun, throwing mud everywhere, digging him in deeper. We were stuck. I pulled up next to him, killed my engine. The sudden silence was heavy, only the crickets and cicadas filling the space. "Damn it, man," Mark said, his voice frustrated. "I thought this was just a puddle." "Looks like you found the bottomless pit," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. But even I felt a little uneasy. Being stuck out there in the dark wasn't ideal. "Let's check it out." We both got off our bikes, our boots sinking into the soft ground around the mud pit. It was thicker than it looked, that really dark, gooey mud. We started trying to rock his ATV, push from the back, pull from the front, anything to get it moving. The tires just spun and spun, spraying more mud. We were getting ourselves covered, hands and arms sinking into the muck, trying to get some traction. The air was so humid, sweat was dripping off our foreheads, mixing with the mud on our faces. Frustration was building. "This thing is really wedged," I grunted, pushing with all my weight against the back rack. "We might need to winch it out." "I didn't bring my winch tonight," Mark said, wiping mud from his eyes. "Damn it, damn it, damn it." He kicked at the mud, sending a splatter towards me. I didn't even care. I was covered already. We kept at it, grunting, pulling, pushing. It was hard work, especially in that heat and humidity. My muscles were starting to ache. We'd gotten it to move a little, just rocking back and forth, but not enough to get it free. And then it happened. The sound. It was like a tree snapping, but amplified, louder than anything I'd ever heard in the woods. A deep, resonating crack that echoed through the trees, cutting right through the night sounds. It wasn't just a branch breaking, it was something massive, something powerful. My head snapped up, looking into the woods, heart pounding in my chest. Mark froze too, mid-push on the ATV. We just stared into the darkness, listening, waiting. Everything else went silent. Even the crickets seemed to shut up for a second. Then we heard it again, the rustling, but it wasn't the gentle rustling of wind in the leaves. This was heavy, forceful, like something big moving through the underbrush, crashing through branches, coming from the woods, deeper in, off the trail. Before we could even process what it was, something flew out of the trees, just appeared, as if launched. It was a tree branch, not a little twig, but a section of a tree. I swear it was about 10, 12 feet long and thick as a volleyball. It came flying out of the blackness, spinning in the air, and slammed down on the trail right next to us. Missed us by maybe 3-4 feet. Thudded into the dirt and gravel of the trail with a sickening whoomp. We both jumped back, startled. My breath hitched in my throat. What the hell was that? A tree falling? In the middle of nowhere? At us? Then the rocks started. Not just pebbles, not little stones. Rocks, big rocks, fist-sized, some bigger. They started raining down around us, not from above like they were falling out of trees, but like they were being thrown, hurled at us from the woods. You'd hear this thwack sound as they hit the ground, or a crack if they hit a tree. They were coming fast, one after another, surrounding us. We scrambled back, away from the ATV, looking wildly around, trying to see where they were coming from, but it was just darkness, thick woods, and rocks pelting the ground. One hit the fender of my ATV with a loud bang. Another one clipped my shoulder, hard. Not enough to seriously hurt, but it stung like hell and sent a jolt of pure fear through me. "What the fuck is that?" Mark yelled, his voice cracking, panic rising in his voice. I didn't know. I had no idea. I was just as terrified and confused as he was. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Wind, no wind. Earthquake, no shaking ground. Animals, what animal throws rocks? Another rock slammed into the ground right in front of me, spitting dirt and gravel into my face. The sound of them hitting, the force, it was terrifying. It wasn't random. It felt directed, like someone was attacking us. But who? What? In the middle of nowhere, at night. Adrenaline flooded my system, pure, raw fear driving me. Survival instinct kicked in. We had to get out of there. Now. "The bikes!" I shouted over the sound of rocks hitting the ground. "Get to the bikes!" We didn't need to be told twice. We both scrambled towards our ATVs, stumbling in the dark and the mud. We were still covered in that thick, sticky mud, hands and clothes coated. We ripped ourselves into the seats, fumbling for the keys, fingers clumsy with adrenaline and fear. Mine started right away. Mark's for a second hesitated, then the engine roared to life. We didn't even think about the stuck ATV, didn't even think about trying to get it unstuck. We just wanted out of that mud pit, out of those woods, away from whatever was throwing rocks at us. I gunned the engine, tires spinning in the mud for a split second before catching traction and launching forward. Mark was right behind me. We didn't look back. We just sped down the trail, our headlights cutting through the darkness, bouncing wildly, pushing harder and faster than I ever had before. Branches whipped past my face, leaves slapped against my helmet. The trail was rough, rocky, full of ruts, but I didn't slow down, didn't dare. I could hear Mark behind me, engines screaming. We were tearing through the woods, blinded by our own headlights, just trying to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever was back there. We rode like that for what felt like forever, maybe only 15, 20 minutes, but it felt like hours, just flat out, adrenaline pumping, fear burning in my gut. Finally, we burst out of the trees and onto the gravel road that led back to the main road. We didn't stop until we were back at the restaurant parking lot where we'd left our trucks and trailers. We slammed to a halt, engines cutting out, silence ringing in our ears after the roar of the bikes. We just sat there for a minute, breathing hard, chests heaving, the silence broken only by the sound of our own ragged breaths and the crickets chirping in the distance, now just sounding normal, peaceful, like nothing was wrong. Then we turned to look at each other. We were both covered head to toe in mud, faces streaked, eyes wide and wild. We were shaking, really shaking. What the hell was that?" Mark stammered, his voice still trembling. I just shook my head. "I don't know," I managed to say, voice hoarse. "I have absolutely no idea." We just sat there, in the dark parking lot, for a long time, not saying much, just trying to process what had happened, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. It was just crazy, surreal, like something out of a nightmare. We loaded up the remaining ATV, leaving Mark stuck out there in the woods, promising to come back for it with a winch truck in the morning, though honestly, I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to go back to that part of the woods again. The drive home was silent. I kept replaying it all in my head, the snapping branch, the rocks, The fear. It just didn't make any sense. And that was the scariest part. Not just the rocks, but the fact that it was completely, utterly inexplicable. We never talked about it much after that. Not really. We tried to a couple times, but it just trailed off. What could you say? Yeah, we got attacked by rocks in the woods. It sounded insane, even to us. We didn't tell anyone else. Who would believe us? Mark went back the next day with his truck and another buddy, and they winched out his ATV. Said nothing was disturbed around the mud hole, except for the tracks we'd made running away and the rocks scattered on the trail. Just normal woods, normal mud, nothing to explain what had happened. We still ride sometimes, but not at night. And never in that part of Wayne National Forest. I can't even bring myself to go back there, even in daylight. That feeling of being hunted, of being deliberately targeted, it just sticks with you. To this day, I have no idea what happened out there that night. Was it an animal? Some weird freak accident of nature? Or something else entirely? Sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet and I can't sleep, I think about it. I still get chills. I still feel that same cold dread creeping up my spine. And I still have absolutely no explanation. It just happened, out there in the dark, in the woods, and I'll never forget it. Story 10. Okay, so this is weird for me to even write down, let alone share, but I keep thinking about it, and honestly, it kind of messed me up. I don't really talk about this stuff, definitely not online, but I saw a thread about, well, things people can't explain, and it reminded me of something that happened back in 2014. It was October, still sunny days, but with that bite in the air that tells you fall is real. I own a pretty big piece of land here in southern Ross County near Richmondale. It's not like a farm, more just woods and fields. I like the peace and quiet, and frankly, it keeps me busy. Back then, I was doing my usual rounds, checking fences, looking for any fallen trees after a storm we'd had a week or so before, that kind of thing. My employee, Bethany, she was with me that day. Bethany's good company, and honestly, 2 sets of eyes are always better than one out in the woods. We were in my side-by-side. I think it was a Polaris Ranger, maybe a 2012 or 2013 model, something like that. We were heading down towards the Skyota River, a route we'd taken 100 times. It's a pretty bumpy ride, but the trail is clear for the most part. Sun was shining, leaves were starting to turn all those amazing fall colors, you know, reds, oranges, yellows. It should have been a perfect afternoon. We were coming up on this clearing near the river, and Bethany poked me and said, "Garnet, look at those birds." I slowed down and looked where she was pointing. Right in the field ahead, close to the tree line, were 2 of the biggest birds I'd ever seen outside of a zoo. Seriously huge, grayish, long necks, really tall. We just stopped the side-by-side and stared. We were both trying to figure out what in the world they were. We see deer all the time, turkeys sometimes, hawks, but nothing like this. They were just standing there, kind of pecking at the ground, seemingly not bothered by us at all. Honestly, they were beautiful, majestic. We watched them for a good couple of minutes, trying to figure out if they were some kind of heron, but they just weren't right. Too big, wrong shape. We joked they must have gotten lost or something. Later, after all this other stuff happened, I described them to a friend of mine who's really into birds, and he said they were sandhill cranes. Said they're around here sometimes, though not super common. At the time, though, we were clueless. Anyway, we were watching these cranes, just kind of marveling at them, when Bethany gasped again, louder this time, and kind of grabbed my arm. I turned to her, thinking maybe a snake or something had gotten close, but she was pointing in the same direction as the birds, but down towards the edge of the woods. What is that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. I followed her gaze, and my blood honestly just went cold. Between the trees in the shadows, but still clear enough to see, was something else. Something that absolutely should not have been there. It was dark. Just dark. Not like shadow dark, but like something solid and black against the lighter trees and bushes behind it. And it was moving. It was low to the ground, kind of hunched over, and it was moving slowly but deliberately along the tree line, in the same direction as the river. And it was big, tall, even hunched over. It was taller than any deer I'd ever seen, and definitely taller than any person. At first, my mind tried to make sense of it. A bear? But it was too, I don't know, off. Bears are bulky, rounder. This was leaner. And the way it moved, it wasn't like a bear. It was more upright, even though it was hunched. Then it straightened up a little more as it moved into a slightly more open patch between some bushes, and I saw its shape clearer for a second. That's when the real fear hit. This wasn't any animal I knew. This wasn't an animal at all, at least not like any animal I'd ever heard of. It was tall, like I said. I'd guess over 7 feet easily if it stood completely upright, but it was still kind of crouched. And it was covered in hair. Long, thick, dark hair. Black or dark brown. I couldn't really tell in the shadows, but it was dense and it moved when it moved. And its head, that's what really freaked me out. It wasn't round like a bear or a deer or anything. It was cone-shaped, pointed almost, like wider at the shoulders, and then it tapered up to a point at the top. And it was down, head lowered, like it was trying to hide, like it didn't want us to see it. And the arms. God, the arms. They were long, way too long. Longer than a human's arms would be on a body that tall. And they were swinging, almost brushing the ground as it moved, but not in a natural way. They swung like they were too heavy for it to just carry normally, or maybe like it was using them to balance itself as it walked. It was walking on 2 legs, definitely 2 legs, but not like a person walks. More deliberate. Each step looked placed, thought out. We just sat there frozen, watching it move along the tree line. The cranes seemed oblivious, still pecking at the ground, just a field away. It was like we were in some kind of bubble, just Bethany and me and that thing. And the rest of the world didn't even know we were there. It kept moving towards the river, and then it got to the bank, where it sloped down into the trees and thick brush that grows right along the water's edge. And then, just like that, it was gone. It just disappeared into the woods by the river. We didn't say anything for a few seconds, just staring at the spot where it had been. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Bethany was breathing heavy, almost gasping. Finally, I just put the side-by-side in reverse, slowly at first, and then I just gunned it. We practically flew back up the trail, not saying a word to each other, just wanting to get away from that place. We didn't stop until we were back at my house, parked in the driveway. We both just sat there for a minute, catching our breath. Bethany was pale as a ghost. I don't think I looked much better. Finally, Bethany spoke, her voice still shaky. What was that, Garnet? What did we just see? I honestly didn't have an answer. I don't know, I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. I have no idea. We sat in silence again for a bit, trying to process it. It felt unreal, like we'd both imagined it, or maybe we were having some kind of shared hallucination in the sun. But we both saw it. We both felt the fear. It was real. We went inside, and I told my husband, Mark, what we'd seen. He's usually pretty down-to-earth, not easily fazed, but even he was taken aback when I described it. He kept asking questions, trying to rationalize it. Are you sure it wasn't a bear? Maybe someone in a costume, a deer standing on its hind legs? But none of it fit. None of it explained what we'd seen. He saw how shaken we both were. We talked about it for hours that evening, going over every detail. The size, the shape, the hair, the way it moved, the cone-shaped head. That head shape kept coming back. It was so bizarre, so unlike anything normal. Mark got out his rifle, checked the ammo, all that stuff. He said he'd go out with me the next day and we'd take a look around. I was hesitant. I really didn't want to go back out there, not after seeing that. but I knew I couldn't just ignore it either. It was my land after all. The next day, Mark and I went back out in the side-by-side, this time with him driving and the rifle across his lap. Bethany was too freaked out to come back, and I honestly didn't blame her. We went to the spot where we'd seen the birds, and... We scanned the area, looking for tracks, for any sign of what it could have been. Nothing. The ground was mostly leaf-covered and a bit dry, so any tracks would have been faint anyway, but we didn't see anything that looked unusual. We went down to the riverbank, to the spot where it disappeared into the woods. Again, nothing. It was like it had vanished into thin air. The woods were dense there, thick undergrowth, lots of trees and bushes, perfect for something to hide, but also perfect for something to just disappear. We spent a couple of hours searching, looking around, but we found nothing. No tracks, no hair, no anything. It was like it had never been there. We even walked along the riverbank for a ways, hoping to maybe see where it might have come out further downstream, but still nothing. Eventually we gave up and went home. Mark was still skeptical, but he admitted it was strange that we couldn't find any trace of anything unusual, especially something that big. He started saying maybe it was just our eyes playing tricks on us, or maybe we'd scared ourselves over nothing. He tried to make me feel better, I think, but I knew what I saw. Bethany knew what she saw. That should have been the end of it. A weird encounter. Maybe we'd imagined some things, got spooked by shadows. Except it wasn't. Over the next few months, I started finding things on my property, strange structures deep in the woods. Not right where we'd seen the creature, but still on my land, further in. They were like nests, but huge, made of branches, woven together but not neatly, more roughly, clumsily, and sometimes they'd be lined with leaves and mud, like something had been sleeping there, something heavy and messy. The first one I found was up on a ridge, tucked away in a thicket of pine trees. It was big, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, a tangled mess of branches, but clearly put together, not just a pile of fallen wood. It was off the ground slightly, like a raised platform, and there was a depression in the center, like something had been lying there. The mud was what really stood out. Clumps of dark, sticky mud mixed in with the branches and leaves. It looked old, dried out, but still there. I found a couple more over the next year in different parts of the woods. Each one different, some bigger than others, some more hidden. They were always in secluded spots, away from trails, away from open fields, deep in the woods, and always roughly the same construction, branches, leaves, mud. I never saw the creature again, not even a glimpse, but these nests, these structures, they were always there, in the back of my mind, every time I went out into the woods. They were a constant reminder of what we'd seen that day by the river. I showed Mark the structures, took him out to see them. He didn't know what to make of them. He admitted they were weird, definitely not natural. He said maybe it was kids playing in the woods, building forts. But these weren't kid forts. They were too big, too hidden, too intentional, in a strange, unsettling way. And who would be out in the woods building forts out of mud and branches way out there, and then just leave them? I still don't know what to think. I try to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, a really weird-looking bear. Maybe the birds were just sandhill cranes, like my friend said. Maybe the nests are just natural formations, branches piled up by the wind, I don't know. Maybe it's all just my imagination playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw that day by the Skyota River. I know what Bethany saw, and I know those structures in the woods. They're real, they're there, and they weren't there before. I still go out on my land, I still do my rounds, but I always feel different now, like I'm being watched, like there's something out there, in the woods, something I don't understand, something that doesn't belong. And every time I go near the river, I get that cold feeling again, that same fear from that October afternoon in 2014. It's been years now, and I still think about it. I still can't explain it. And honestly, part of me doesn't want to. Some things are just better left unexplained, I guess. Or maybe some things can't be explained. Maybe that's just the way it is. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods alone, I still feel like it's watching me. And I still get chills, and I still look over my shoulder, just in case. Story 11. Look, I'm not much of a writer, never claimed to be. But something happened to me. Something out here on my land, and it's got me messed up. I gotta get it off my chest, even if it's just to strangers on the internet. Might sound crazy to some of you, but I swear on my life, every word is true. I've lived here, in Breathitt County, Kentucky, practically my whole life. This land's been in my family for generations. We're talking deep woods, hollows, the kind of place where city folks get lost on GPS. Growing up, you heard stories. My Uncle Stanley, bless his heart, he swore he saw something back in the 70s down by the Middle Fork River, fishing with a buddy. Said they were out all night, and first they heard splashes, like someone throwing rocks in the water. Figured it was kids messing with them. They rowed across to the other side of the river. Then, he said, the splashes got heavier, louder, like someone was dumping bags of sand. Scared them good, 'cause it was pitch black and no one around. They went back to their original side, chained the boat to a tree, and started fishing from the bank. Then that's when they heard it, branches cracking behind them in the woods. He shone his carbide lantern and saw it. Big, dark, hairy, coming down out of a tree. Said it was 8 feet tall, easy. They didn't even untie the boat. They ripped it loose from the tree and rode like hell. He never talked much about it after, just kind of shook his head and stared into the fire when it was mentioned. Me? I thought it was just a good fishing story, until I saw something myself. I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8, coming back from town with my dad late one night. We were driving up our old driveway, which was even worse back then. Headlights cut through the dark, and there, just off to the side of the road by this big oak, stood something tall and dark. Dad slowed down, and we both just stared. It was huge, silhouetted against the tree line. Like a man, but way bigger and different. The headlights hit it full on, and it took off up the hill, crashing through the underbrush. Dad didn't say a word, just kept driving. Never spoke about it after that night, not to Mom, not to anyone, just buried it. Kids are perceptive, though. I knew something weird happened, something that scared him. I didn't understand what it was, not really, but I never forgot it. Years went by, I moved away for a bit, city life, all that. But the woods call you back, you know, especially when it's in your blood. Came back, built a place on the old family land. Married Clara, had our little girl, Emily. Life was good, quiet. We'd hear noises in the woods sometimes, sure. Coyotes, deer, raccoons, the usual. Nothing to worry about. Then it started up again. The weirdness. It was winter, maybe 93 or 94, something like that. Snow on the ground, a few inches maybe. We were coming home late again, from visiting Clara's folks. Parked the car at the bottom of the driveway, like we always did when it was snowy or muddy, 'cause that driveway turns into a real mess in bad weather. Emily was tiny, maybe 2 years old, asleep in my arms. No flashlight, didn't think we needed one. Full moon that night, bright as day almost, reflecting off the snow. We started walking up the driveway, steep hill, especially with a kid in your arms. I was breathing heavy already. Then I saw it. Across the ravine, on the other side, moving through the trees. Big, dark shape. It was walking upright, easy to tell even in the shadows and moonlight. Tall, tall. Like 7, 8 feet, maybe more. Moving with long strides between the trees. It wasn't a deer, wasn't a bear. It was wrong. It was the way it moved, the size of it, the upright posture, just off. My heart started hammering in my chest. I didn't say a word to Clara. She wouldn't have seen it anyway. She was looking down at the path, making sure of her footing. I just kept my eyes locked on it as we walked. It was moving parallel to us, on the other side of the ravine, just gliding through the woods, like it owned the place. We reached the top of the driveway without stopping. Usually, we'd have to pause 2 or 3 times to catch our breath on that hill, especially with Emily in my arms. But that night, we walked straight up, like we were being pushed or pulled, like we couldn't stop if we wanted to. Got inside, locked the door, didn't say a word to Clara about what I'd seen, didn't want to scare her. Put Emily to bed and just sat up in the living room looking out the window into the woods. Moonlight was still bright. Everything looked different, heavy. After that night, things got persistent. It wasn't always visual sightings, more subtle, creeping things. That feeling. You know the one? Like you're being watched, all the time. Not just when you're in the woods, but even in the house. I'd be doing chores outside, or just sitting on the porch, and I'd get this prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like eyes on me from the trees. I'd turn around, scan the woods, nothing, just the trees, the shadows, the wind rustling the leaves. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Then there were the smells. Horrible, rank smells. Like something dead and rotting, but musky almost. Animalistic, but worse. It would drift on the wind, sometimes faint, sometimes strong enough to make you gag. Usually at night, but sometimes during the day too. Always from the woods behind the house. I checked for dead animals, raccoons, opossums, whatever. Never found anything. The smell would just come and go, like a ghost. Clara noticed it too. She'd wrinkle her nose and ask, "What is that awful smell, Jeremy?" And I'd just shrug and say, "Probably just the woods, honey," trying to play it down. But inside, I knew it wasn't normal. It wasn't just the woods. Then came the sounds. At first, it was just the tree knocks, deep, resonant thumps echoing through the woods at night. Like someone hitting a tree with a baseball bat, but louder, deeper. Sometimes one knock, sometimes 2 or 3 in a row. They'd come from different directions, sometimes far off, sometimes closer, deeper in the woods behind the house. At first, I thought it was just trees falling, branches breaking, but these weren't natural sounds. They were deliberate, rhythmic, almost communicative. And they always happened at night, when everything else was quiet. The dogs started acting strange too. We had 2 dogs back then, Blue, a big old blue tick hound, and a Feist terrier, Cricket. Good dogs, tough dogs, raised in the woods. They were used to every forest sound. But they started getting agitated, jumpy, barking at nothing it seemed, just staring into the woods, hackles raised, growling low in their throats. And then, the weirdest thing, they'd suddenly go quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. Barking, growling, and then silence. They'd tuck their tails between their legs, slink back to the porch or their dog houses and hide, like they were terrified of something in the woods. And Blue, he was a fearless dog. Nothing scared Blue, except whatever was out there. One night, it was winter again. I think it was a few years after that first driveway sighting. It was a cold, clear night. Stars were bright. Moon was just a sliver. Quiet. So quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. Clara and Emily were asleep. I couldn't sleep, just restless, edgy. I got up, went out onto the porch in my boots and a jacket. Just needed some fresh air. The woods were black as pitch. Couldn't see anything past the edge of the yard, but I could hear everything. The creak of branches in the cold wind, the rustle of leaves underfoot, somewhere out there. The quiet murmur of the creek down in the hollow. And then I heard it. A sound I'd never heard before. Not an animal sound I recognized. It started low, a deep, guttural growl almost. Then it rose in pitch, becoming a howl, a scream, high-pitched, chilling, like something in pain, but also angry and wild. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the hillsides. It went on for what felt like forever, a raw, primal scream that clawed at your insides. My blood ran cold. Every hair on my body stood up. I froze, listening. The dogs started barking from inside the house, frantic, terrified barks. Then they went silent, just like that, choked off. The screaming in the woods went on, higher and higher, then faded slowly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I stood there on the porch, shivering, not just from the cold. My heart was pounding. I wanted to run inside, lock the door, hide under the covers. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, listening to the silence, a silence that felt heavy, charged, like something was still out there, watching, listening. Finally, I forced myself to move, back inside. Locked the door, checked on Clara and Emily. They were asleep, didn't stir. I sat up all night in the living room again, listening to the woods, waiting. Didn't hear another sound, nothing but the wind and the quiet creaks of the old house settling. Next morning, everything seemed normal. Sun shining, birds singing. Clara made breakfast. Emily chattered away, like nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I could still feel it in my bones, that cold dread from the night before. Later that day, I went out into the woods, trying to be rational, trying to explain it away. Maybe it was a mountain lion or a bobcat, something injured. Something making a strange noise I hadn't heard before. But mountain lions don't scream like that, and bobcats don't sound like that primal, human-like agony. I walked back behind the house, deeper into the woods than usual, following the direction I thought the sound had come from. And that's when I saw the trees, broken trees, big trees, snapped clean in half, way up high, 10, 12 feet off the ground. Not storm damage. The breaks were too clean, too high up, like something incredibly strong had grabbed them and just snapped them. And they weren't scattered random storm damage. They were in a line leading deeper into the woods, like a trail or a boundary marker. I followed the line of broken trees for a while, going further into the woods than I usually did. The feeling of being watched was intense now, stronger than ever. The woods felt wrong, oppressive, like something was aware of me close by, just out of sight. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see, I don't know what, something big, dark, hairy, something like my uncle saw, something like I saw on the driveway. I didn't see anything, just the trees, the shadows, the silence. But the feeling, that was real, tangible. I turned around, went back home, heart pounding in my chest. Didn't go back into those woods alone for a long, long time. Things haven't stopped. The feelings, the smells, the tree knocks, sometimes those awful screams. It comes and goes, in waves. Sometimes weeks go by quiet, then it all starts up again. Dogs are always on edge out here, always listening, always jumpy. We get used to it in a way. You have to live out here. You learn to ignore some things, to tell yourself it's just the wind, just the animals, just your imagination. But deep down, you know it's not. I still live on this land. It's my home, my family's home. I can't just pick up and leave, run away from something I can't even explain. But living here, it's a tension, a constant low-level fear, always simmering under the surface. Knowing there's something out there in those woods, something unseen, unknown, something that watches, that listens, that leaves its mark in broken trees and chilling screams. I can't explain it. I don't know what it is. Bigfoot, the old-timers call it crazy, I know. But after all these years, after all these things I've seen and heard and felt, I don't know what else to call it, and I don't know when it's going to stop, or if it ever will. It's just here. And we just live with it. That's all I can tell you. That's how it is out here in these woods. That's what living here feels like, and tonight it's quiet. Too quiet, maybe. And I'm sitting here looking out at the dark trees, listening, waiting. For what? I don't know. But I'm waiting, always waiting. And that's the scary part, I think. The waiting, the not knowing. The feeling that it could be just beyond the tree line, watching me right now, and there's nothing I can do about it. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, even years later. It was supposed to be just another day, you know. Up in Scioto County, logging like I always do. Been doing it since I was practically a kid, following in my old man's footsteps. It's honest work, pays the bills, and I actually like being out in the woods, most of the time. This day was different from the get-go, though. There was a storm brewing. You could feel it in the air, that thick, heavy stillness that hangs around before the sky opens up. Boss man was on my back to get this section cleared before the rain hit. Typical. He always pushes when the weather turns bad, says it's motivation, more like risking our necks to him. Anyway, I was pushing it myself, trying to get done. Chopping away at these oaks and maples, good solid trees, the kind that fight you a bit, but split clean once you get the cut right. Sweat was already pouring off me, even before the humidity really kicked in. Just that pre-storm air makes you feel like you're breathing soup. I was moving fast, but not sloppy. Safety's drilled into you from day one in this job. Lose a finger or worse if you get careless with a chainsaw, and ain't nobody gonna pay your bills but you. So, yeah, moving fast, but eyes open, paying attention. But then this feeling started creeping in, that prickly feeling on the back of your neck, like someone's staring at you. You ever get that? Just a sense you're being watched. Out in the woods, alone, that feeling gets amplified, let me tell you. I stopped cutting for a second, chainsaw idling, buzzing away in my hand. Listened. Just the wind rustling the leaves starting to pick up a little. Birds were quiet, spooked maybe by the weather coming. Nothing else. Figured it was just my nerves, the pressure to get done, the storm making me jumpy. Turned around just to check, you know. Thought maybe the boss man had snuck up to see if I was actually working or screwing around. He does that sometimes, thinks he's sneaky, hiding behind trees, checking up on us. Annoying as hell, but nobody there, just trees. Trees and shadows and that growing gloom from the storm clouds rolling in. Shook my head, told myself to knock it off, get back to work. Stupid nerves. Started in on another tree, a big oak, maybe 2.5 feet thick at the base, lining up my cuts, wedge planned, the whole 9 yards. That feeling came back, stronger this time, like eyes boring into the back of my head. It wasn't just nerves anymore. This felt different. Stopped the saw again, switched it off completely this time, just for a second of real silence. Silence except for my own breathing, and my heart thumping a little faster than it should. Listened hard. Nothing. Still just the wind, but now it was a bit louder, whispering through the leaves. This time, when I turned around, I scanned the whole area, slow and careful. Looked back the way I'd come from, towards the access road. Looked deeper into the woods, where I hadn't cleared yet. Nothing. Just trees. More damn trees. But that feeling, Jesus, it was like ice water running through my veins. Told myself again, it's just the woods, just the storm, just getting to me. Woods do that sometimes, mess with your head, especially when you're out there alone all day. It's easy to start seeing things that aren't there, hearing noises that are just the wind. Tried to convince myself of that. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the woods. This was something else. Got back to the oak, made my back cut, starting to get through. Concentrating hard on the saw, on the feel of the wood cutting, on the way the tree was leaning, trying to block out that feeling, trying to block out the creeping unease that was turning into full-blown, well, not quite panic, but something close. Then it happened. I was almost through with the back cut, just a little hinge left. Eased off the throttle a hair, just to control it when it went. Took a step or two around the trunk, positioning myself to watch it fall, making sure it went where I wanted it to go, away from me, away from the equipment. That's when I glanced back. Just a quick glance, over my shoulder, back towards the woods I'd been working in. Habit, I guess, part of being aware of your surroundings, and that's when I saw it, just for a split second, behind a big beech tree, maybe 50, 60 yards away. Something big, brown, tall, taller than any man. At first I thought it was a bear. We get bears in these woods, black bears mostly, but they're around. But this wasn't right for a bear. Too tall, too upright. Then I saw the arms, long arms dangling down, and hands, definitely hands. Clamped onto the side of the tree, fingers wrapped around the bark. It was standing there, next to the tree, sort of peeking around the trunk, just for a heartbeat. Brown fur or hair or whatever it was, kind of shaggy looking. And then it saw me looking at it. I swear to God it saw me. It was like our eyes locked for a second. I didn't see a face clearly, not details, just a dark shape where a face should be, and I felt something ancient, wild, watching me. Then, quick as lightning, it ducked back behind the tree. Gone. Vanished. Like it was never there. I froze. Chainsaw still humming in my hand, half-cut tree teetering, the whole world seemed to stop. Just me and the silence, and the image burned into my brain. What the hell was that? Bear? No way, not like that. Man? No freaking way. No man that tall, that hairy, out in the woods like that, hiding behind trees. My mind started scrambling, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, the shadows playing games in the woods. Maybe I was just stressed, tired, imagining things. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was real. Something real, standing there, watching me. And it was big. Jesus, it was huge, taller than my shed back home, easy. My heart was hammering in my chest now, banging like a drum. Hands were shaking, I could barely hold onto the chainsaw. That feeling of being watched was gone now, replaced by something else, something colder. Fear. Real, honest-to-God fear. I wanted to run, just drop the saw and bolt, get the hell out of those woods, back to the truck, back to anywhere but here. But I couldn't move, stuck there, frozen in place, staring at the tree where, whatever it was, had been. The wind picked up again, stronger now, whipping through the trees, bending the branches. The sky turned even darker, almost black to the west. The first rumble of thunder rolled through the woods, distant but getting closer. Rain was coming, and I was still standing there like an idiot, staring at a tree. Then, slowly, my brain started working again. Dumb thoughts. Practical thoughts, logger thoughts. Gotta finish the cut, gotta drop the tree, gotta get the hell out of here before the storm breaks. Shook my head, tried to clear the fog, took a deep breath, forced myself to move. Finished the back cut, tapped in the wedge, stepped back. The oak groaned, swayed, and crashed to the ground right where I wanted it. The familiar thud and shudder of a big tree falling. Usually it's a satisfying sound. Today, it just sounded loud. Too loud. Switched off the saw, dropped it on the ground, not even caring if it landed on something soft. Didn't matter. Just wanted to get out of there, wanted to see if it was still there, behind that tree. Or maybe somewhere else now, closer. Stupid, I know, completely stupid. But I had to know. I had to see. Curiosity, fear, I don't know what it was. But I started walking towards that beech tree, slowly at first, then faster, heart pounding every step. Walking through the undergrowth, snapping twigs under my boots. Wind howling now, rain starting to spit down in fat, heavy drops. Getting soaked already, but didn't care, just focused on that tree, got closer, 50 yards, 40, 30. Vision blurry with the rain, but I could see the tree clearly now. Big, smooth bark, grey in the gloom. Nothing behind it. Just trees beyond, and more trees. Walked right up to the tree, circled around it slowly, scanning the woods. Nothing. Empty. Like it had vanished into thin air. Or maybe it had never been there at all. Maybe I really had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I knew what I saw. No tracks in the leaves, though. Rain washing everything away already. No broken branches. Nothing to show anything big had been there. Just woods. Empty, wet, and increasingly scary woods. The storm broke then. Full force. Rain came down in sheets, thunder cracked overhead, lightning flashed through the trees, blindingly bright and then black again. Woods turned into a wild, roaring, chaotic mess, and I was standing there, soaked to the bone, adrenaline still pumping, heart still racing, staring at nothing, feeling like a complete fool, but still terrified. Ran back to my saw, grabbed it, stumbled through the woods towards the access road, towards the truck. Didn't stop running until I was back in the cab, doors locked, engine roaring to life. Pulled out of there like a bat out of hell, tires spitting gravel, mud flying everywhere. Didn't look back once. Got back to the yard, boss man yelling at me for taking so long, for not finishing the section. Told him the storm hit too fast, had to get out of there for safety. He grumbled but let it go. Didn't mention anything about what I'd seen. Couldn't bring myself to say it. Sounded too crazy, even to me. Went home that night, shower, ate something, tried to relax, but couldn't. Kept seeing it. That tall brown shape behind the tree. Those long arms, those hands gripping the bark. That feeling of being watched. The fear. Tossed and turned in bed all night, rain hammering on the roof, thunder still rumbling in the distance. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it so clear, it was like it was right there in the room with me, kept replaying it in my head, over and over. Was it a trick of the light? Could it have been something else? A deer standing on its hind legs? Nah, too tall, too human-shaped, but not human. Bigfoot. That stupid word popped into my head, unbidden. Bigfoot. People talk about it, joke about it, don't really believe it. I never believed it. Thought it was just stories, campfire tales, nothing real. But what else could it have been? What else could be that big, that tall, that out there in the woods, watching me? Ridiculous, I thought. Bigfoot, come on. It was probably just something I imagined. Stress, nerves, storm, woods playing tricks. Had to be something like that. But deep down, a little voice whispered, "You saw it. You know what you saw." And I did. I knew. Even if I couldn't explain it, even if it sounded insane, I knew I'd seen something out there that day. Something not right. Something other. The next day, went back to work. Same section of woods, same job. Boss man still on my back to get it done. Weather was clear, sun shining like the storm had never happened. Woods were quiet, peaceful, too peaceful. Worked all day, kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening for anything at all. Nothing. Just birds singing, squirrels chattering, the wind in the leaves, normal woods sounds. Didn't see anything. Didn't feel that feeling of being watched. Just empty woods. Tried to tell myself it was all a dream, a hallucination, stress-induced craziness. Tried to forget about it. Tried to push it out of my mind. But I can't forget it. Every time I go out in the woods now, especially when the weather's turning, when the shadows get long, I think about it, I look for it, I listen, and I know deep down that whatever it was, whatever I saw that day, it's still out there in those woods, watching, waiting, and I just hope, I really, really hope, I never see it again, because whatever it wasn't natural, it wasn't normal, and it scared me in a way nothing ever has before, and that fear stays with you. It sticks to you like mud, and you can't wash it off, not ever. I still don't talk about it much. People would laugh, call me crazy, say I was seeing things. Maybe they're right, maybe I am crazy, but I know what I saw, and that's enough for me. Too much, maybe. Because every time I step into the woods now, I'm always looking over my shoulder, always listening for something in the trees, and always wondering if it's watching me back. And that's the God's honest truth. Story 13. Okay, so this happened last fall, and honestly, I still get freaked out just thinking about it. I feel like I need to get this out there somewhere, because talking about it with people I know, forget it. They just give you that look, you know, the one that says, "Yeah, okay, crazy lady." Anyway, it was Pine Ridge State Park. Beautiful place, usually. I'm a marine biologist by trade, but I've always been fascinated by cryptozoology, anything unexplained, really. Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, you name it. My son Finn, he's 15, thinks it's all a bit silly, but he's a good kid, and he goes along with my eccentricities. So, I convinced him to come with me to Pine Ridge. There's this trail, the Pilgrim Stonehouse Trail, supposed to be Bigfoot hotspot, apparently. I wasn't going in blind. I did my homework, downloaded maps, even marked out areas that supposedly had high activity based on online forums and reports. Yeah, I know, it sounds nuts, but I wanted to see for myself. I packed my gear, hiking boots, backpack, water bottles, the whole 9 yards. I even brought my little dachshund, Pipoca. She's usually game for anything, a real adventure dog. And yeah, I packed an audio recorder because why not? Gotta document everything, right? Finn mostly rolled his eyes, but he was filming everything on his phone, figuring he'd at least get some funny videos out of it. We started hiking in the early afternoon. The trail was pretty, deep woods, lots of tall pines. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what you expect. I was trying out these Bigfoot calls I'd practiced, these loud whoops and howls. Finn was cracking up, of course, but I was serious. You never know, right? We walked for a couple of hours, didn't see anything unusual, just the usual squirrels and birds. Honestly, I was starting to feel a bit foolish myself. Then we reached the stone house. It's not really a house, more like this rock overhang, kind of like a small cave. Pretty cool looking, actually. But when we got there were other people. Families, couples, regular park visitors, figures. I wanted to wait until they cleared out. Bigfoot isn't going to stroll out while there's a bunch of noisy humans around, right? So we hung back, pretended to be looking at the scenery, just killing time. The sun started to go down and the park slowly got quieter. The families packed up and left. Finally, it was just us at the stone house. The sky was turning all these crazy colors, orange, purple, really beautiful. It should have been perfect. As soon as we were alone, I started with the calls again, a bit louder this time. I even smacked a couple of rocks together like I read they supposedly do in some Bigfoot encounters. It felt ridiculous, but I was committed. And then we heard something, faint, way off in the woods. It was like a low growl, almost a moan. It echoed through the trees. I froze, and Finn stopped filming, finally looking a bit less amused. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, what was it?" I got excited, I'm not going to lie. This was it. Proof. "Maybe," I started to say, but then I noticed the clouds rolling in, fast, dark clouds piling up in the west, and lightning flickering on the horizon. Thunder rumbled distantly. Okay, maybe not the best time to be playing hide and seek with whatever it was. "We should probably head back," I said, a little of my enthusiasm draining away. Finn looked relieved. "Yeah, good idea." We started walking back the way we came, picking up the pace. Pipoca was still trotting along beside us, sniffing everything, tail wagging. But then things changed. Pipoca stopped, ears perked up. She started sniffing the air, then turned, facing back towards the stone house, towards the darkening woods. Her happy tail stopped wagging. She whined, a low, nervous whine I'd never heard from her before. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, bending down to her. She wouldn't come to me. She just stayed there, frozen, staring into the trees. Then she tucked her tail between her legs and started whimpering, trying to hide behind my legs. This wasn't normal for Pipoca. She's usually fearless. Something was definitely spooking her. And then we heard it again, the sound from before, but closer this time, much closer. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. It was more like a heavy breath, a deep, guttural sound, like something massive was moving through the woods, breathing hard, and branches breaking, loud cracks and snaps. Not like a deer or a raccoon, way bigger. My heart started pounding in my chest. Fear, real fear, hit me like a wave. This wasn't a fun adventure anymore. Something was out there, something big, and it was coming closer. I grabbed Finn's arm. "Run," I whispered, my voice trembling. We started running, practically stumbling through the undergrowth. I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't see anything, just the dark trees, the shadows getting longer in the fading light. But I could hear it. The heavy breathing, the snapping branches getting closer, faster. It was definitely following us. We'd run for maybe a minute, maybe less, but it felt like forever. We stopped for a second to catch our breath, listening. Silence, just the wind rustling the leaves, the distant rumble of thunder getting louder. Had it stopped? Had we lost it? Relief flooded through me for a split second. Then it started again. Closer, much closer, and louder. It wasn't just breathing now. There were heavy footsteps, thuds, like something huge and heavy was pounding the ground, crashing through the woods, and a kind of shuffling sound, like dragging feet through leaves. We started running again, faster this time, pure panic driving us. Pipoca was barking now, yelping with fear, scrambling to keep up. I was tripping over roots, branches whipping at my face. I could feel my lungs burning, my legs aching, but I didn't dare stop. Every few seconds, I'd glance back. Still nothing visible through the trees, but the sounds. They were right behind us. I could feel it. The presence, heavy, menacing, like something was hunting us. This wasn't Bigfoot curiosity anymore. This was something else, something terrifying. We'd reach a slightly open patch in the trail. I risked another look back, pushing Finn ahead of me, and then I saw it, just a glimpse, a dark shape moving between the trees, too big to be a person, way too big, tall and bulky, and dark. It moved fast, impossibly fast for something that size. Terror shot through me, cold and paralyzing. I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to know. All I knew was we had to get away. Now. I screamed at Finn, "Run faster, run!" I don't even know if he heard me over the pounding of my own heart. We kept running, blindly, desperately. The sounds behind us were relentless, closing in. Then, wham! Something exploded in the woods to our right. Loud crash, like a tree falling. And then another one, wham! Closer this time, and then rocks, big rocks, crashing through the trees, landing nearby, not just falling, being thrown. "Rocks! It's throwing rocks!" I yelled to Finn, my voice cracking with fear. He was pale, eyes wide with terror. We could hear them whistling through the air, crashing into trees, some landing closer and closer to the trail. One landed right in front of us, kicking up dirt and scattering pebbles. It was huge, bigger than my head. "The lake!" I shouted, remembering the trail map. "The parking lot is past the lake. If we can reach the lake." I didn't finish the sentence, just ran harder. The lake was our only hope, a more open space. Maybe it wouldn't follow us there. We burst out of the trees and into the open space around the lake. It was still dim, the last light fading fast, but it was definitely less dense than the woods. We could see the water, dark and still in the twilight. And the parking lot, a little further on, the blessed sight of our car. But then bang! Another rock landed. Not near the trail this time. It splashed into the lake, a massive splash, water showering up into the air. And another one. Bang! Another splash, closer to the shore. It was throwing rocks into the lake, aiming for us, like it was herding us, driving us towards something. We were in full-blown panic now, sprinting towards the parking lot, tripping over rocks, stumbling in the uneven ground. Pipoca was still barking, a frantic, high-pitched yelp. I could feel tears streaming down my face, fear choking me. I just wanted to get to the car, get away, get out of there. And then it happened. I tripped. I went down hard, scraping my knees, my hands hitting the rocky ground. My glasses flew off my face, landing somewhere in the undergrowth. I was blind without them, everything blurry. "Mom!" Finn screamed, stopping and turning back to me. "Go!" I yelled at him, scrambling to my feet. "Just go! Get to the car!" I couldn't see properly. I was disoriented, terrified, but I knew we couldn't both stay here. He hesitated for a split second, then nodded and kept running towards the parking lot. Pipoca followed him. I got back on my feet, stumbling blindly after them, everything a blur of shapes and shadows. I could hear the sounds behind me, still coming, still close, but I couldn't see anything clearly. It was like being trapped in a nightmare, everything distorted and terrifying. I just kept moving forward, driven by pure survival instinct. I finally made it to the parking lot. I could hear Finn frantically unlocking the car. I stumbled towards the car, fumbling for the door handle. my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I got the door open, threw myself inside, slammed it shut. Finn was already in the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, hands shaking even worse than mine. He finally got the engine started. The headlights flashed on, cutting through the darkness. He threw the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and we lurched backwards, out of the parking spot and onto the park road. He didn't stop, didn't slow down. He floored it, speeding down the winding park road, away from the lake, away from the woods, away from whatever was in there. We didn't say a word for a long time. We just drove, fast, away from Pine Ridge. Pipoka was whimpering in the back seat, curled up in a ball. Finn was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I was just staring straight ahead, still shaking, heart still pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. We didn't stop until we were miles away, out of the park, back on the main highway, lights of civilization around us. We stopped at a gas station and just sat there for a while in silence, catching our breath, trying to process what had just happened. We didn't talk about it much that night, and honestly, we haven't talked about it much since. I never went back for my glasses. They're still out there, somewhere in the woods near Pilgrim's Stonehouse Trail, another piece of my sanity lost in Pine Ridge. I still don't know what we saw, or what chased us. Bigfoot? Something else? I don't have an explanation, and honestly, I don't want one. Some things are better left unexplained, buried in the darkness of the woods. I just know that something out there changed me that day. Something primal and terrifying, and I'll never forget the sound of those heavy footsteps behind us, the breaking branches, and the rocks splashing into the lake in the fading light. Never. Story 14. It started subtly, out here in Oakhaven, especially when fall rolls around, things get quiet. Real quiet. You get used to the rustle of leaves, the wind in the trees, maybe an owl hooting way off. That's the usual soundtrack for my evenings on the back porch. I'm Sam Becker, by the way, retired mechanic, living on my piece of land I bought years ago. It's peaceful usually, I like it. Back in 2011, it was a beautiful autumn. Crisp air, leaves turning those fiery colors. Me and Clara, my wife, we'd sit out on the porch after supper. I'd have my pipe going, she'd sip her tea. One night, it was late October, I guess, I started hearing this sound coming from the woods behind the house. Just a low growl, guttural, like a dog, but different, deeper. At first I thought, well, maybe a coyote. We get them out here, but this didn't sound like any coyote I ever heard. I listened, trying to pinpoint it. It came again, the growl, longer this time, more menacing somehow. I shrugged it off, figured it was just some animal being territorial. Next night, same thing, and the night after, it became a nightly thing. I'd be out there, enjoying the peace, and then this low, rumbling growl would start from the edge of the woods. I mentioned it to Clara. "Hear that, hun?" I asked her one night. She listened, head tilted. "Yeah," she said, a little frown forming. "What is that? Sounds unsettling." That's the word for it, unsettling. It was more than just an animal noise. It had a weight to it, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up a bit. I started getting curious, but also a little uneasy. It wasn't normal animal sounds. So I called up my cousin Carlos. Carlos is a lumberjack, tough as nails, knows the woods like the back of his hand. I figured if anyone could tell me what was making those noises, it'd be him. "Carlos," I said on the phone, "you got a minute? Something weird's going on out here." I explained about the growling, how it was every night coming from the woods behind my property. He chuckled. "Sounds like you got yourself a bear, Sammy." "I don't think so, Carlos. This ain't like a bear. It's different. You gotta hear it to know what I mean." He agreed to come out the next day and take a look. We met up in my backyard. It was a bright, sunny morning, kinda took the edge off the nighttime creepiness. We walked towards the tree line. Carlos, he's a big guy, always got this confident swagger. Me, I was feeling a bit jumpy already, even in daylight. "All right, Sammy, where you hearing this?" Carlos asked, scanning the woods. "Over that way, towards the cornfield." I pointed. We'd already harvested the corn, but the stalks were still standing, all dry and brown. We walked into the woods, the sunlight dappling through the leaves. It was quiet, peaceful. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then Carlos stopped dead in his tracks. "What in the—" He pointed to something just off the path. It was like a structure made of branches, twisted, thick branches interwoven together, forming this weird, messy thing. It was taller than me, easily 7, 8 feet high, kind of cone-shaped, leaning against a thick oak tree. "What the heck is that?" I said, genuinely puzzled. Carlos walked closer, circling it. "Ain't natural, Sammy. This is built by something." We examined it. The branches were clearly broken, not fallen naturally. They were piled up, almost woven together in places. It was crude, but definitely deliberate. Then we saw the tracks. Big tracks in the soft earth near the base of the branch structure. Way bigger than any deer track. Wider, too. Almost human-like, but way bigger. And different somehow. Claw marks, too, but not like a bear's. More like thick nails digging into the ground. "Those are some serious tracks," Carlos said, his voice losing a bit of its swagger. He looked around, his eyes sharp, scanning the woods. "And look at this." He pointed to a patch of dry leaves near the tracks. Scattered amongst the leaves were droppings, but not normal animal droppings. These were huge and covered in leaves like something tried to bury them. The smell hit us then. Faint, but definitely there. Musky, foul. Like something rotting but mixed with something else. Something animalistic, wild. Carlos was quiet for a minute, just looking around. He walked deeper into the woods, me following close behind. We pushed through some brush, and then we saw it. It was hidden, nestled in a thicket of bushes and small trees, almost like someone was trying to conceal it. Another structure. But this one was different. It was like an igloo, but made of branches and thick green vegetation, completely enclosed, except for a small, dark opening. "Holy," I breathed. I felt a chill go down my spine, even in the sunlight. This was way beyond weird. "Carlos," he was staring at it, his usual confidence replaced with a look of awe, maybe? Or was it fear? I couldn't quite tell. "Think it's an animal den?" I asked. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't right. It was too deliberately constructed, too planned. Carlos shook his head slowly. "No den I ever saw looks like that. And look at the size of it." He started circling the igloo-like structure. "This thing's big, Sammy. Real big." He crouched down by the opening, peering inside. "Dark in there," he muttered, "but it goes back a ways." He pulled out his tape measure from his belt. He measured the entrance, then the diameter of the structure. About 10 feet across, maybe more. And that opening, easily 3 feet deep just to get inside. Someone could crawl in there and disappear. He looked back at me, his face serious. "We got to come back with a camera, Sammy, and some better lights. I want to see what's in there." We agreed to come back the next day, after Carlos got off work. We marked the spot with some bright tape, just to be sure we could find it again. Walking back to the house, we were both quiet. The woods felt different now, no longer peaceful. There was a tension in the air, an unseen presence that prickled your skin. That night, the growling started again, from the edge of the woods, just like always. But now it sounded different to me. It had a new edge to it, knowing what we'd found in the woods that day. It wasn't just a random animal growl. It felt territorial, like whatever was out there knew we'd been snooping around its place. The next day, Carlos couldn't make it. Something came up at the lumberyard. We rescheduled for the day after, but then it rained, pouring rain all day. so we figured we'd go out the day after that. Finally, the day came. Sunny again, a bit colder. Carlos came over after work. We grabbed some flashlights, my old Polaroid camera, and headed back into the woods. We walked to the spot where we'd marked the trail, but when we got there, the tape was gone, ripped off the tree. We looked around, confused. Maybe the wind, but it wasn't that windy. And the tape was torn, not just untied. We went deeper into the woods, following the path we'd taken before, heading towards where the igloo structure was. We reached the thicket of bushes, and it was gone. The igloo was just gone, vanished, like it had never been there. There was no trace of it, no flattened vegetation, no broken branches, nothing, just empty bushes. We stood there staring at the spot, dumbfounded. Carlos walked around in a circle, kicking at the leaves. "No way," he muttered. "No freaking way. It was right here. I swear it was right here." I was speechless. It was like something out of a movie, an igloo-sized structure just disappearing overnight. Impossible. But it was gone. We searched the area, widening our circle. We looked for any sign, any clue. Nothing. It was like the woods had swallowed it whole. That's when the paranoia really started to set in. Back at the house, the growling continued every night. But now it felt closer, bolder, and the smell, the foul, musky smell, it got stronger. It started to drift around the house at night, even into the open garage. It was nauseating, like rotting meat mixed with something, wild, musky, and just plain awful. Clara started complaining about it too. She'd wrinkle her nose and say, "What is that god-awful stink, Sam? It's making me sick." I tried to play it down, tried to tell myself it was just animals or something decaying in the woods, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The smell wasn't natural, and the growling, the missing igloo, it was all connected somehow. One night, it was a full moon, clear sky. I was out on the porch trying to relax, smoking my pipe. The growling started again from the woods, but this time it wasn't just a growl, it was angrier, more aggressive, and closer. My little terrier, Max, he was inside the house. He's a feisty little fella, thinks he's 10 times bigger than he is. He started barking, low and rumbly, sensing something outside. I opened the porch door to let him out, figuring maybe he'd scare whatever was making the noise. Max shot out onto the porch, barking like crazy, charging towards the edge of the woods. He's fearless, that little dog, usually. Then it happened. In the deep shadows of the trees, where the woods were black as ink, 2 lights appeared, not headlights, not flashlights, eyes, orange eyes, burning orange glowing in the dark. And they were high, way higher than any dog's eyes, higher than a deer's, higher than anything I'd ever seen in the woods around here. They were easily 8 feet off the ground, maybe more. Those eyes just materialized in the darkness, and they were staring right at Max, staring right at us. Max's barking faltered. He stopped in his tracks, frozen. The confident barks turned into a whimper, a low, pathetic whine. The orange eyes blinked, slowly. They seemed to shift, turning, focusing directly on Max. And then Max yelped, a high-pitched, terrified yelp, like he'd been hurt badly. He spun around and bolted back to the porch, scrambling to get back inside. He was trembling, shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He ran right past me, tail tucked between his legs, and hid under the kitchen table, whimpering and panting. I stood there, frozen on the porch, staring at the woods. Those orange eyes were still there, glowing in the dark, watching. I could feel them burning into me, even though I couldn't make out any shape, just the eyes and the growl. It was louder now, closer, and there was another sound now too, a heavy rustling, like something big was moving through the underbrush, coming closer. I slammed the porch door shut and locked it. My heart was pounding in my chest like it was trying to beat its way out. I ran inside, locking the main door, checking all the windows. Clara came running from the bedroom looking scared. "Sam, what was that?" What happened to Max? He's terrified." I couldn't speak at first. I was still shaking. I pointed towards the woods, my hand trembling. "Eyes, Clara. Orange eyes, big eyes, out there, in the woods." She looked at me like I was crazy. "Eyes? What are you talking about? Maybe a deer?" "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "Not a deer. Way too high, way too big. And the way Max reacted, Clara, he was terrified. He's never been scared of anything like that." I told her about the eyes, about Max's reaction, about the growling getting closer. She started to look scared too. We stayed up all night, lights on, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. The growling continued, off and on, all through the night. And the smell. It was stronger than ever, seeping into the house, making our stomachs churn. Dawn finally came, grey and cold. The growling stopped. The smell faded a bit, but it was still lingering. Max was still hiding under the table, wouldn't come out, wouldn't eat. That night, out on the porch, staring into the darkness, something fundamentally shifted in me. I went from a worried, curious skeptic to a believer. I don't know what else to call it. I saw those eyes. I saw the terror in my dog. I heard the growls, felt the oppressive presence, and the smell, that unholy stench. It all pointed to something unnatural, something I couldn't explain. Now I spend my days researching. Internet, books, everything I can find. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. It sounds crazy, I know. Retired mechanic suddenly obsessed with Bigfoot. But after what I saw, after what we've been hearing and smelling, I can't deny it anymore. Something's out there. Something big and wild and, I don't know, intelligent. To build those structures, to disappear like that, to have eyes like that. It's not just some animal. I still patrol my woods during the day, looking for tracks, for signs. I haven't seen the orange eyes again, not since that night. But the growling continues, most nights. And the smell, it comes and goes. Sometimes it's so strong it makes you gag. Clara, she's scared. She wants to move, leave Oakhaven, leave this place. But I can't. Not yet. I need to know. I need to understand what's out there in my woods, what's been growling at me from the darkness. Those eyes, they haunt me. I see them every time I close my eyes. Orange, burning, watching from the darkness. I know it sounds insane, but I swear to you on everything I hold dear, this happened, this is real, and I still don't know what the hell it was. I just know something is out there, and it's watching us. Story 15. Okay, so I don't usually do this, like share personal stuff online, especially something this weird, but I've been reading some of the stories here and, well, maybe getting it out there will help. I don't know. It's been eating at me for months, and I still can't make any sense of it. It happened last October, classic spooky season, right? Fitting, because spooky is exactly what it was. I work as a night nurse at the Willow Creek Clinic. It's a small place, mostly just dealing with the local community. Shifts can be long, and that night had been a beast. Flu season was kicking in, plus a couple of emergencies that kept us all running ragged. By the time my shift ended, I was beyond tired. Just wanted to get home and collapse. I live just outside Willow Creek, a bit further out towards Pinewood. To get home, I usually take Blackwood Road, but that night, for some reason, I decided to go via Willow Creek Road, then onto Old Mill Road. Don't ask me why. Maybe I just felt like a change of scenery or something. Probably the worst decision I've made in a while. It was foggy, like really foggy. The kind of fog that swallows up everything. You know, damp, chilly, and thick as soup. Visibility was crap. My headlights were barely cutting through it. Everything outside the car was just this swirling grey mass. The road is mostly surrounded by woods there, tall pines and oaks all crammed together. Normally it's kind of peaceful driving through at night, even a little pretty in the moonlight. But that night, the fog just made it feel closed in, almost claustrophobic. And quiet, too quiet. like the fog was muffling all the sounds, even the usual crickets and night noises. I was driving maybe 30-35 miles an hour, just taking it slow because of the fog. The radio was playing some mellow music, just background noise, really. My mind was mostly blank, just running on autopilot, thinking about sleep and maybe a hot bath when I got home. I was coming up to that sharp bend on Willow Creek Road, the one before it joins up with Old Mill Road, Dead Man's Curve, the locals jokingly call it, because it's so tight and easy to misjudge if you're not paying attention. I was being extra careful, slowing down even more before the turn, and that's when it happened. As I rounded the curve, my headlights caught something in the road. At first, I honestly thought it was a deer. We get deer around here all the time, darting across the road, stupid things. But as I got closer, braking instinctively, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was standing in the middle of the road, just standing there. And it was huge. My first thought after deer was maybe a bear. But bears aren't like that. This thing was upright, standing on two legs, and it was tall. Way taller than any bear I'd ever seen, or even heard about. My headlights were full beam, shining right on it, and it was still taller than my car. I swear it must have been at least 7 feet tall, maybe even taller. It was dark, completely dark, like it was absorbing the light. It was covered in hair, thick, matted, dark hair, like black fur, but coarser, almost bristly looking in the headlight beam. And it wasn't just like a bear's fur, you know? It was longer, shaggier, and it seemed to move even when there wasn't any wind. Like it was alive, almost. It was broad, too, massive. It filled up the road. It wasn't just tall, it was wide. It was like a wall of darkness and hair. I remember thinking, in that split second, that it was wider than a doorway. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The car skidded a little, but thankfully I managed to stop before I hit it. Stopped just maybe 15-20 feet away from it. Close enough. Way too close. It didn't move when I braked. It didn't even seem to react to the screeching tires or the headlights blinding it. It just stood there, blocking the road like it owned the place. And then it started to move. Slowly, deliberately. It started to walk across the road. Just walked, like it was taking a stroll in the park. Not hurried, not scared, not aggressive. Just walking, from one side of the road to the other, and as it walked I could see its arms. They were long, really long, reaching down almost to its knees, and they were swinging loosely as it moved, like a gorilla or something. But again, bigger. Way bigger. I was frozen, completely and utterly frozen. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could just stare. And the thing, it was just walking, across the road, in front of my car, in the fog. I watched it, every second feeling like an eternity. It moved slowly, deliberately and silently. There was no sound, no rustling of leaves, no snapping twigs, no breathing. Nothing. Just this massive, dark, hairy thing moving in absolute silence in the middle of the foggy night. As it got closer to the edge of the road, to the woods on the other side, I could see more detail. Even though it was still mostly shrouded in shadow and fog, I could see the shape of its head. It was rounded, like an ape's, but again, wrong. Too big, too primitive. I couldn't make out any features, not really, just darkness and hair. And then it was gone, just like that. It reached the edge of the road where the trees crowded in, and it just disappeared, vanished into the fog and the woods as if it had never been there at all. 1 second it was there, blocking my way, a monstrous shape in my headlights, and the next, empty road, just fog. I sat there for, I don't know how long. Minutes? maybe just seconds that felt like minutes. My body was shaking. I was drenched in cold sweat even though it was a chilly night. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I was terrified, pure primal terror. My brain was screaming at me to move, to get out of there. But my body was still locked up. I felt paralyzed, like I was stuck in a nightmare and couldn't wake up. Finally, slowly, shakily, I put the car in drive. I didn't even think about going towards Pinewood anymore. Pinewood could wait. I wanted to go home, now. I did a shaky three-point turn, my hands trembling so badly I could barely control the steering wheel. I spun the car around and floored it in the opposite direction, back towards Willow Creek, back towards my house. I drove like a maniac, way too fast for the fog, way too fast for the road, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away, away from that place, away from that thing. I didn't stop until I pulled into my driveway. I left the engine running, just sat there for another minute, staring at my house like it was some kind of safe haven in the middle of a war zone. Then I turned off the engine, fumbled for my keys, and practically ran to the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy and stiff with fear. Got the door open, stumbled inside, slammed the door shut behind me and bolted the deadbolt. Then I locked the other locks, checked them twice. Then I went to the windows and made sure they were all locked too. I felt ridiculous, barricading myself in like that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. Tomas was asleep. He works day shifts as a sheriff's deputy. He was dead to the world. I went into the bedroom, switched on the light, and gently shook him awake. He grumbled, half asleep. "Elisa, what's wrong? You're home early?" "Tomas," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw something." He sat up, rubbing his eyes, finally noticing how pale I was, how freaked out I looked. "What is it? What happened?" I told him. Just blurted it all out, about the fog, the road, the curve, and then the thing, the massive, hairy, dark thing in the road. I described it as best I could, the height, the width, the long arms, the way it moved, the silence. He listened, his expression slowly shifting from sleepy confusion to concerned disbelief. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Elisa, honey, you were tired, right? It was a long shift. Maybe you just imagined it." "Imagined it, Tomas?" "I know what I saw. I was wide awake, driving home. It was right there, in front of my car. I could have touched it. Okay, maybe not touched it, but it was close enough that I felt I could have." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know you're shaken up, but a 7-foot-tall, hairy thing standing in the road, that sounds unlikely to say the least. Tomas is a practical guy. He deals with facts and evidence. He's not really one for believing in monsters in the woods." "Unlikely or not, I saw it, Tomas. I'm telling you, it was real." My voice started to rise, the fear and frustration boiling over. "Do you think I'd make this up? Do you think I enjoy being this terrified?" He saw my face then, really saw it. Saw the genuine terror in my eyes, the tremor in my hands. He knew I wasn't kidding around. Tomas knows me. He knows I'm not prone to flights of fancy. His expression softened. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Calm down. I believe you saw something, but maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or, I don't know, a really big guy in a costume. It's almost Halloween." "A bear?" "Tomas, it was nothing like a bear. It was huge, way bigger than any bear. And its arms, its shape. It wasn't a person in a costume. It was different. Wrong." I shivered just thinking about it again. He was quiet again for a while, thinking. Then he said, "Okay. Look, I'll drive out there in the morning, see if there are any tracks, anything at all." I nodded, but I knew in my heart there wouldn't be. Whatever it wasn't going to leave tracks like a normal animal. It felt unnatural. The next day, Tomas did drive out there. He went to Willow Creek Road, checked the curve, the edge of the woods. He spent a couple of hours looking. He came back empty-handed. "Nothing," he said. No tracks, no broken branches, no signs of anything unusual, just road and woods and fog residue. He tried to sound reassuring, but even he seemed a little off, like he was starting to doubt his own skepticism. Then, a few days later, I was talking to Mrs. Henderson at the clinic. She's an older lady, been living in Willow Creek her whole life. We were talking about the weather, about how foggy it had been lately, and somehow the conversation drifted to, well, strange things in the woods. You know how small towns are. Gossip travels fast, even if it's weird gossip. And she said, casually, like it was nothing, "Oh, you know, my nephew Billy, he said he saw something strange out on Willow Creek Road last year. Around the same time, October, I think. He was driving home late from Pinewood, and he swore he saw something big and hairy cross the road in front of him. Said it scared him half to death." I froze. "Willow Creek Road?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Near Dead Man's Curve?" She nodded. "That's the one. Said it was foggy that night too. He didn't like to talk about it much, just said it was something he'd rather forget." The blood drained from my face. I felt cold all over again. It wasn't just me. Someone else had seen something. In the same place. Around the same time of year. A year earlier. I told Tomas about it that evening. He listened, and I could see the change in him. The skepticism was still there, but it was muted. He was starting to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it than just my imagination or stress. We haven't talked about it much since. It's like neither of us knows what to say. Tomas still hasn't offered any explanation, and I don't have one either. I haven't driven on Willow Creek Road at night since. Not once. I take the long way, even if it adds time to my commute. I just can't bring myself to go back there, especially not in the dark, especially not when it's foggy. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. That massive dark shape in the headlights, the silence, the slow, deliberate movement, the feeling of absolute, unexplainable fear. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know if it was even real. But I saw it. I know what I saw. And I'll never forget it. And that's it. That's my story. I know it sounds crazy, but it happened. I swear it happened. And sometimes, especially on foggy nights when the silence gets too heavy, I still get that feeling. That cold, creeping dread. Like it's still out there, in the woods, waiting, and I have no idea why. Here.